What pranks did you play on your school using the IT computers? Used an altered version of a JavaScript web browser hack that turns all of the pictures shown into pictures of French toast. Rotated monitors 90 degrees in graphics card settings. I did this a lot in primary school until my teachers sat me down for hacking the system and I was almost suspended. My school district used Macs pretty much everywhere. A couple of the most common pranks. There was a key combination that would invert all of the colors on the screen. If I recall correctly, it was the meta keys and 8. It was a lot of fun to do this to someone who left their computer unattended and didn't know that. Then one of the function keys, I think F11, would move all of the windows to the outer edge of the screen, showing the desktop. Pushing it again moved them back, but there was an animation associated with both of the movements. If you held Shift while tapping F11, it would do the same thing but with the animation slowed down. The thing is, it didn't matter if the animation had completed or not, the machine would queue up another action for each time you hit F11, but wouldn't cancel the animation in progress. So, if you were quick enough and someone wasn't paying attention, talking to their neighbor, looking at a book, etc., you could lean over, spam Shift plus F11 a few times, and effectively force them to watch all of their windows slide in and out at a snail's pace for a minute or two. Took the Windows startup sound, edited in 8 minutes of dead air, then edited in 15 seconds of bedroom noises. Made that the new startup sound. Ah, yes. Back in grade 6, this kid decided to write XXX a bunch of times in a Word document, then turn up his volume up to max and have the computer read it out. Cue 24 11-year-olds laughing as his computer yells out a naughty word over and over. Putting an S after the HTTP part in the web address bar. It bypassed the school firewall. I felt like an awesome hacker. My God. You mean that was all that was holding me back from complete browser freedom when my friends and I were just spending all our lunch breaks in the computer lab instead of out in the sun? I feel so cheated. It probably doesn't work anymore though. I remember at my old school someone managed to disable the H key on lots of the computers. If you were typing and tried to press H, you'd get an error message saying like, "Sorry, but the H key on this computer is currently disabled. Please try again later. The H key is disabled. Type help to fix it." Control, Alt, and directional arrow flipped the screens different directions. I stopped when I was told that I could permanently mess up the computers. And then I started again in college. I did this to a friend and she didn't know how to undo it, so she turned her laptop sideways to Google how to fix it. I did that in grade school. They had to pay a computer technician to come in. He said that there was a virus and it wasn't fixable, and left. I flipped it back the next day. When my school got smaller, more modern monsters, I'd flip the screen upside down, but also turn the monster upside down so it looked normal. Oh, I mean monitors. Autocorrect is a birch sometimes. Unplug mouse from the back of computers 1 and 2. Switch the plugs, but leave the mice where they are. Mouse in front of computer 1 is now plugged into computer 2 and vice versa. Watch the hilarity ensue. Ah, IT teachers, those jerks that provide me with job security. We'd take a screenshot of the desktop as it was, then delete all of the items off the desktop, then make the screenshot we took the wallpaper. We'd watch people futilely click on the wallpaper and enjoy. Something else we'd try on occasion, since we were in graphic design class and had access to the necessary programs, besides Paint, was create fake window warning and dialog boxes. We'd make them say things like, delete computer? Or delete hard drive? Or something else completely obnoxious like that. Then we'd just remove the no option or make both options say yes. When it was done, we'd add it to the wallpaper that's already on the computer so it looks like there's a real dialog box that's popped onto the screen. This only worked once or twice that I remember. I think we fooled the programming teacher who was really just the baseball coach teaching a class in order to remain as the coach. It's harder to get someone with this one, but it's equally funny. Our school had a standard wrong password 3 times lockout rule. Given the IT teacher was a stone's throw from retirement, he wasn't the quickest. I think we managed 3 lockouts in one session. Our school network ran on Windows for Workgroups 3.0. Machines were locked down so you couldn't run your own programs on them. However, we discovered if you put a modified win-ini file that allowed you to install your own programs in a network drive that came before where the lockdown version was stored, it would use that and you could install stuff. And that That was my first introduction to Doom multiplayer. Somebody threw a Molotov cocktail into the window of a computer lab at my school. It was over a weekend, thankfully, so nobody was there, but it destroyed all of the computers in the room. My friend and I got blamed for it because the teacher whose lab it was thought that we didn't like her. Which, that's true. Thankfully, our alibi was that we were on a plane flying back from a school exchange trip to Belgium when the damage occurred. There were several teachers on the flight to corroborate our story. That and, plane tickets. I used to play the hidden XL97 flight simulator during my boring high school typing class. Joke's on me because I still can't type properly. I rendered all of the school's computers unusably slow for a day by putting hundreds of millions of copies of a picture of a fat frog onto the shared hard drive, filling it completely. If you had the patience to sit there until your computer logged on, you still couldn't save or do anything. Back when the mice had those little tracking balls on the bottom, we'd remove the balls and leave the rest of the mouse. As a side note, does this count as neutering computer mice? Nothing malicious, really, just bypassing the security BS and playing a lot of StarCraft. Soundboards. Holy crap, were we little demons in middle school with those things. My personal favorites were either Arnold Schwarzenegger or Pulp Fiction. When the teacher would ask if there were any questions, from the back of the class you would hear in a thunderous voice, "Who is your daddy and what does he do?" followed by an eruption of laughter. Also following up any time the teacher said, "That's correct," with "Correctamundo." If you're reading this, Miss Jadish, I'm so sorry. Oh yeah, almost forgot. Some kid found a way to print from all the computers in school from one computer. So naturally, someone printed 800 copies of a picture of a turd to all the computers in the school. 'Twas known as Brown Thursday. Our IT was crap at our school. If you knew the specific computer number, you could make it shut down only using the Windows command exe. The staff stopped seeing the fun in it when we found the principal's computer number. My middle school, which had Windows XP, had a startup folder from a network share. Except they forgot to remove write permissions for students on the drive. It was a teacher share. We added a startup script to open and close the drive. A couple of days later, every computer in the library was marked as out of order. It's wild to think that I would have gladly done any and all of these and laughed when I was in school, but little crapbags like me were causing absolute nightmares for school's poor IT workers who were just trying to go by one day without kids finding their ways to print butts directly onto the staff room printers. I just put a bunch of strange messages in autoexec.bat. Every time the thing would boot up, you'd get a quote like, "Do not look behind you," or "The package has been delivered. It's in locker number," and then I'd give a random unused locker number. Or something like that would pop up. Also the command, on startup, run paint. On open paint, renders the computer unusable for a 2007 high school IT professional. This probably shows my age, but we'd open BASIC and write a little program that went something like this. 10 lprint you suck, 20 go to 10. Then we'd edit the shortcut to a popular program like Microsoft Word to link to this program instead. When an unsuspecting user clicked to open what they thought was a legit program, instead they'd be treated to the dot matrix printer screeching out, "You suck! You suck! You suck!" forever. The only way to stop it was to find and terminate the program. Powering down the printer and turning it back on again wouldn't do it. My high school had a program on all of the computers that would allow the teachers to watch an entire classroom's screens, take control of them, and send content to them, among other things. A friend of mine came up with an idea to try and use it to prank the classroom, being the genius 16-year-olds that we were. So when my teacher wasn't looking, I put a USB stick into her computer and copied her spy program exe directory onto it to take a look at what was different between the teacher and student versions. Turns out all you needed to make the student version a teacher version was a 25-character license key that was in a plain text file. So obviously, I copied it and upgraded my client to a controller using all of my teacher's settings. We then proceeded to rickroll the classroom on full volume from 34 computers, which was pretty great. At the end of the class, we came up with another great idea. What would happen if we took control of our teacher's computer and messed with her? So we connected to her computer, but she had been watching our screen from her screen. So for about 5 seconds we see a bottomless pit of our screen in her screen mirrors over and over and over. After about 5 seconds, our PC fans got super loud and then shut off. When we tried to turn it back on, it was a black screen with only a flashing underscore in the top left corner. That PC had to be re-imaged by district tech support. Still not sure what caused that. Me and a friend replaced our computer science teacher's My Computer icon with a shutdown shortcut displaying a "mwahahaha" message for 3 seconds before turning off the computer. She clicked it 3 times. Wasn't really the sharpest arrow in the quiver. Some guy has been updating a games folder on the school's public H drive. None of the teachers or tech support guys can get rid of it or set it up so that we can't use it. No one knows where it came from except it's been there since forever. It has Counter-Strike 1.6, Day of Defeat, Halo Combat Evolved, a Halo ODST emulator that actually works. I too have questions. Roller Coaster Tycoon, Team Fortress Classic, Doom, KOTOR, Minecraft, Old School RuneScape, Elder Scrolls Morrowind, and a few others. Like a lot of people suggested, I went and looked at the games folder to try and copy it. Much to my dismay and others, the folder is now almost gutted, excluding a proxy program, Halo Combat Evolved, Undertale, and Counter-Strike. I guess they got wise to us. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. In 1998, this idiot bought like 5 scanned adult magazines on a floppy disk and decided to open them in computer class. Suspended on the spot. I have no idea what the frick he expected to happen. Guess he was thinking with his hard drive, not his floppy disk, if you know what I'm saying. Well, we moved all of the abacus beads to one side. Yes, I'm older than most Redditors. When I went to school, electricity wasn't invented yet. We used candles to watch TV. I'd always switch the buttons on the keyboards to spell naughty words. I'd discovered a way to disable the teacher's view of my computer. After logging in, I simply unplugged the internet cable that connected me to the school server. The spy program would appear in the toolbar. I'd simply exit the program and reconnect the internet cord. My screen would just appear totally black on their screen. The teacher was kind of impressed I was able to find a way to disable it. She only warned me to not do it again. In 5th grade, I found out you could set words to autocorrect to whatever you want in MS Word. Then Word got out and suddenly half of the words you typed on any computer would autocorrect to "I love D in my butt lololololololol." The teachers were horrified. 4 words. Nicolas Cage Chrome extension. I'd always take the little rollerball out of the bottoms of the mice, guaranteed an afternoon of entertainment every time. We figured out we could make the computer sound like chainsaws by putting a handful of quarters into the CD drive. Then we did it a lot. Shift and print screen to capture desktop, open Paint, Ctrl-V, rotate image upside down and save, set image as desktop background, auto-hide taskbar. On desktop, right-click, view, uncheck, show desktop icons, laugh at random victims attempting to use the computer. This is a combination of 2 of the more common pranks found here, the monitor rotation and the desktop picture replacement. Totally the kind that me and my idiot friends would do and then immediately get caught because we were peeking and laughing over our big box monitors. In 2001, I think, friends and I installed StarCraft deep in my school's file network, accessible on every computer in the building, and we had it programmed to run without a disk. You'd still need a CD key to play, but hacked and false CD keys were really easy back in the day. We passed out false CD keys to those who knew to ask us. And since it was all on the shared network, you could LAN from basically anywhere in the building. This was right around the time when computers were becoming really prevalent in schools. Not just with computer labs, but many classes now had multiple computers or were specifically just on computers. So we'd end up organizing these pretty large StarCraft battles across the school. Even got to the point where, in drafting class, where the teacher absolutely didn't care what we were doing, it even got to the point where my 2 friends and I, massive nerds if that wasn't obvious, would play some of the jocks in the class who loved StarCraft. We didn't just break into the system to have fun, we also broke down barriers to make life better. We also doctored a local newspaper article to look like it was a story about how our principal, who was out on medical leave for back surgery after he fell off a roof, was actually on leave because a gerbil got stuck in his butt, and his wife lit a match to look down the insertion tube to try and see if she could see the gerbil, and the tunnel of methane ignited in a small explosion, giving his butt cavity third-degree burns. The gerbil survived, singed and exhausted, but otherwise okay. We then printed it off and passed it around the school. In hindsight, that was a pretty messed up thing to do. I changed the screensaver from liberal arts by putting an F in front of arts. Oh boy, we pretty much ran the network. It was up or down at our whim. The entire network used hubs, and this was right as routers were becoming a thing, so they weren't yet economical. We'd shut down the entire network with a repeated ping command in DOS set to max packet size. It was far too simple. We wouldn't usually do it for long, just enough for everyone to think it was a hiccup and to see if we could. Our computer class was actually really awesome. The assigned modules were easy, and once we were finished, our teacher would let us do our own thing. Turns out, our school had an entire computer graveyard. We'd go in there, find parts, and build entire computers. Eventually, we had a separate network of 8 or 10 machines that we used exclusively for Quake 2 and the original Halo. One day, the school came in and removed our separate gaming computers. We were angry. The network was down for quite some time. So, computer class for most of grade school was nothing more than endless typing classes. She sells seashells by the seashore and other tongue twisters to get us practicing home rows and typing quickly. Absolutely mind-numbingly dull. Sure, getting to play Commander Keen or Wolfenstein after was nice, but the reward was nowhere near worth the effort to reach it, and the teacher would constantly get frustrated with me ditching home rows and finishing faster and more accurately without them. So one day, with us both being frustrated with each other, I restarted the computer and opened the BIOS setup utility and started changing random settings to random values. Yes, I was a vindictive child. Yeah, I was a typing pro due to my online gaming habits back in middle school, like StarCraft, Diablo 2, Warcraft 3, the others. I got my teacher into a deal that if I could accurately finish the entire course curriculum in 4 classes, then I could play Oregon Trail for the rest of the year. A lot of settlers died from dysentery that semester. To the dumb student who tried to mess with the school computers by shoving paper into the CD tray, don't use paper with your class schedule, full name, and ID number on it. Idiot. I did that on purpose. And that teacher didn't have my name or ID number on it. You fell for a classic one. I never did anything to damage computers, just circumvent security measures. Using standalone browsers or games from a flash drive, using said browsers or proxies to get around web filters, installing programs and games in the C-root directory, since most group policy or other security measures wouldn't stop something from executing from there. Finally, I can contribute. I was in college, in a classroom, waiting my turn to an exam, which was held in another room. Bored out of my mind, behind me was a PC. I saw a red button that said 220. I say out loud, "What does this button do?" and press the button. The button now says 150 and a loud bang and smoke comes from inside the PC unit. I'd turned the PC power supply from 220 volts to 150, which toasted it. The room was full with my colleagues. Everyone looks at me in disbelief. I begin to laugh out loud, not believing what just happened. Luckily, nobody told on me to the professor, who was a pretty grouchy guy. I managed to install Linux on almost 90% of all computers at the school at once. There were several flaws in the network that I discovered over the years that let me essentially ruin, to the IT department at least, over 110 of their machines. Firstly, since these were mostly Macs, I was able to abuse their poorly configured guest account system to gain screen sharing access to any Mac that was currently logged in, regardless of the account that was currently in use. Second, the IT department set up some sort of program that would read a script file, then update the Macs according to the file via single user mode, I think. I modified one of the update scripts to a Linux image instead of an OS X update. I can't remember what I did, but I think there were specifically modified images that will install a default system state silently, requiring no user input other than the parameters for the disk partition when being run in the command line. that somehow worked. So essentially, the next scheduled update completely messed the school by installing an OS that nobody knew how to use. It was glorious, and apparently it was cheaper to toss the Macs and buy new ones than pay the IT department to actually reinstall OS X by hand. Whatever, I got a ton of free Macs that day. Unexpectedly good outcome. I think it was in 2004, my IT teacher let me use an old laptop for a project. Inside it was a floppy disk with the username and password for all users on the learning platform we used, including teachers. The rest of the semester I logged into the teachers' accounts, found the hand-ins from the best students, downloaded and made it my own, and handed it in from my own account. Never got busted, but I realized I used almost the same time altering assignments as I could have if I just made my own. Also had some fun with the let me rule Trojan from time to time. You people are what prevents me from being able to finish my coffee in the morning. Damn you all. Not school, but many years ago when I was a hapless little bag of crap, I was walking by a couple of computers in one of those "we sell anything" cheap stores. There was one on an end cap, it was running 95 or 3.1, I can't remember. So I logged out, opened DOS and said, "Format C," and walked away. I'm sure I've paid for it over the years in karma. My friend and I entered into the operating system itself a virus that would essentially hunt through email accounts with .edu addresses, so all teachers and admin, and display a picture of two women doing the deed. If the operator clicked more than 10 times, a video started. If the operator clicked more than 20 times, the noise started. The only way to get rid of it was pretty simple: Control-Alt-Delete and use taskbar to shut it down. Not that complex, obviously. Although, to be honest, I didn't do a lot of programming. I did some of the basics, however. I mostly did the strategic planning of how we were actually going to get it done and implement it. My friend's dad was a programmer and a hobbyist hacker, so he actually helped my friend design it. I still find it hilarious that his dad was willing to screw with the teachers. He must have really hated our school a lot. However, most teachers didn't know that. They didn't know who did it, but it was hilarious. What be some of the strangest things about life on the high seas? Things can get much heavier quickly because the floor is moving. Machinery running within steel walls will destroy your hearing, and fire is very, very scary. The most dangerous thing out there, weirdly. In the case of the US Navy, we had a dedicated at-sea fire party. This was made up of damage control men and hull technicians. We would be the first responders in any sort of fire, flooding, or toxic gas situations, including reactor emergencies. We would fight the fire until we either A, put it out, or B, it would get out of control and the ship would then go into general quarters, battle stations. Then the rest of the crew would meet in their predetermined areas and help fight the fire or flooding. The ship is broken into sections that have repair lockers, think mini fire stations, with all the equipment to fight. When the fire is initially called away, the fire party will respond to the closest repair locker and then gear up and move out from there. In a GQ scenario, each repair locker is manned by the entire crew. Every few feet in the ship, on every deck and level, is a fire plug with a hose and nozzles. The hoses are fed by seawater that we've pumped in and loops at a constant 150 psi. The ship is designed in a manner that sections can be closed off with watertight doors and fire-tight doors. That way, you can keep it isolated. In the case that the fire is burning so intensely that we can't make entry to actually fight the fire, you would go into the compartment above or below or next to and spray the decks or overhead to try and keep the heat from becoming so intense that it lights off another fire. As a hull technician, I did extensive training both before the fleet and during the fleet. On the ship, the fire party trains and runs drills several times a week, and the GQ drill at least once a week in my cases. In the fire party, we have all of our positions that we know to go to immediately, like nozzle man, team leader, scene leader, plug man, plotter, etc. The main thing is don't let fires happen. It's the #1 killer for us out there, so a lot of time and effort goes into prevention. In conclusion, put the wet stuff on the hot stuff. When you get off the boat, you don't actually feel off the boat for sometimes a week. Vertigo is real nasty. I never got seasick ever. My first time being on a boat was for a month. Then getting off in Portugal, I got land sick. It was a bummer. Trying to compensate for waves that don't exist. My father made his living back in the day repairing old fishing ships for recreational use, so I spent a lot of time at sea. I've fallen out of the shower at home after being out for a few months. You get used to the ship rolling and your body adapts and sways to compensate. When you're back on land, it can take a few days to reorient yourself. You can be showering and not realize you're swaying. Before you know it, you're on your butt with the shower curtain wrapped around you and a bump on your head from the curtain rod. As a man who can trip over on an unimpeded straight walk with no help from vertigo, the narrator is beginning to think he should never ever go on a long voyage. I've always slept better at sea. I think the rolling of the ship has something to do with it. I always enjoyed the rough weather. Everyone seems to be in a better, cooperative mood due to the shared experience, like how neighbors all pull together in a big snowstorm. I spent a lot of my childhood at sea with my dad, and one thing I always remember about sleeping on the water is the sound of barnacles. My bunk was right up in the bow and right against the hull at water level, and you could hear them eating at night. To those who haven't heard it, they snap their beak things closed when they catch plankton, or at least that's what I assumed was happening. And there's like a billion of these things living on the outside of the boat, so you can hear this constant multitude of faint clicks, almost like rain. It's a soothing noise. I miss it. That sounds both so gross and so soothing. You can become very disoriented from being surrounded by nothing but water. You get to see so much of the world, but 70% of it is water. We joined the Navy to see the world, and what did we see? We saw the sea. If you wanted to join the other 30%, you should have joined the Army like a real man. The constant movement. Plus, if you're standing watches, you never get enough steady sleep, and you're only half there after 2 or 3 days. You'll find yourself dozing off on your feet. Also, when you eat, keep a hand on your plate. Probably how beautiful the stars are and how frightening the sea gets during a storm. The only time I've ever really seen the Milky Way was in the open ocean at night. We were going back to our rental house in the Bahamas. I was about 14 and had no idea what I was looking at. I didn't understand when my sister told me it was the Milky Way, but it made a huge impression on me. Electronic communications technician here, aboard a submarine. I control all the information going on or off our boat. I establish secure communication with satellites and other ships. I love it, and I wouldn't want to do any other job in the Navy. Getting fresh fruit and vegetables is very rare. Going months without sunlight screws with your head, but your body still knows when it's time to go to bed anyway. We make our own water and air, but from time to time we'll come to the surface for some fresh air. At that point, no one can sleep because the O2 levels just shot up. The ocean is bigger and deeper than you think. It's amazing how much contrast the water has from port to port. The blue water in the Pacific is unlike anything I've ever seen on TV or in magazines. It's beautiful and vast. You have to see it from the deck of a submarine to grasp it. So, when there's a storm, how far underwater are the effects of it seen? For that matter, is there ever turbulence of any kind from things like currents or thermoclines? It depends on how bad the sea state is. I've been pretty deep under a bad storm and we were rocking a bit. We try to go around what we can if they're really bad. Kind of a different perspective here. I served in the US Navy for some time aboard an aircraft carrier. Fresh water is a precious resource, so showers are a bit different. You don't get in and stand under running water. It's essentially a hose with a button on the side of the nozzle. The steps for taking a shower are as follows. 1. Get wet. 2. Soap and wash. 3. Rinse. You work 12 hours, then 12 hours off. It's a loud environment and the ship shakes and shudders often during flight operations. Sometimes to get from point A to point B on the ship requires going up and down several ladders or stairs. My dad is the captain of a 4-story tugboat in the Gulf of Mexico. They putter along at 2 to 6 knots from Brownsville to somewhere in Florida and anywhere in between, pushing up to, I think, 12 or 20 barges. He spends 2 weeks on the ship and 1 week off. He hates it. His deckhands play video games and watch cartoons in the galley. If anything, he probably enjoys yelling when that happens. He has to wake up at noon, sleep at 6 p.m., wake back up at midnight, and go back to sleep by 6 a.m. This is so a relief captain can take over for half of the day. That order reverses on the second week. Deckhands cook the food. The only good food they can make is Neiman Marcus cake, which is very rich. He's home now for a week. I'd get him on Reddit to tell his stories in his own words, but he refuses to get on here. He'd rather get his news from the television. Point is, he hates working on that ship, but that's all he knows how to do. When you start off on a boat, you're a deckhand. You're the captain's whipping boy. You'll run many miles a day on a ship with wet-painted steel floors. Be expected to lift 100 pounds straight up 8 feet, no problem. Chance of man overboard. Pays very well and you can get a job as a deckhand almost any time with no experience. There you go, if narration ever fails me, I can follow the call of the sea, lift 100 pounds several times a day, break my back, and fall overboard. That's the life. Royal Navy here. I love the fact that on the upper deck of one's ship, looking out to sea, you're seeing what sailors 100, 200, 500, and 1,000 years ago saw. The exact same. Now go to a Roman ruin and look at it. That's not what they saw. I love that, even though it's just waves and stuff. I worked on a cruise ship for a year. There are many things that I could mention. Most likely that you'll have no windows in your room. This is quite disorienting if you feel movement all the time but can't see what's going on. Internet is spotty and expensive. The ship moves, sometimes a lot. There are seriously passengers who don't understand this tiny fact. Everything can be dangerous. As the first guy said, fire is the main enemy of a ship. People all train constantly for disasters when they work and live at sea. This training can be hit or miss, but every bigger ship has the systems in place to save lives if something happens. But not just for fire. Trainings are held for bombs, evacuation, and other things. That said, everything is beautiful. Life is basically full of beautiful sunsets and sunrises, and amazing beaches and cultures in between. Your shipmates will have interesting and crazy lives that you will learn about intimately, whether you want to or not. Life at sea is obviously vastly different for someone sailing a small boat than for someone working as one of an 800 crew member on a cruise ship, but I do highly recommend doing it if you have the opportunity. I loved it. The stress from being out there alone, working in harsh conditions with the same people over and over every day. Some people got into fistfights, some people were just so agitated they wanted to be left alone. But a lot of us made jokes and tried to have fun. My favorite part was going out into the middle of the night and seeing all the stars. So many stars with no artificial lights to block them. And when we went to Alaska, we saw the northern lights. It was amazing to see the lights reflected off the water. I had pictures, but my camera was stolen. I was in the Navy and life at sea had become very routine. We were at sea for almost 3 months straight during a deployment. We, most of us, had standard working hours during the day. The guys in the engine room were 6 hours on, 6 off. We stood watch, ate, watched movies, and did whatever else we could to stay busy. Other than drills and actual emergencies, not much changes day to day. I always enjoyed smoking cigarettes at night. The smoke boxes, as we called them, were one of the only places we could be outside at night. Navy ships run dark at night with no outside lights or white lights above the main deck. The smell of the ocean, the sound of the ship moving through the water, and the stars in the sky was something that I'll never forget. It was a different lifestyle that I really fell in love with. Yeah, parts of it sucked, but it sure beats sitting in a cubicle all day. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I've done a couple of hitches on a traditional Arctic schooner. The concept of privacy is very different. In some cases, the only personal space you have is a 6-foot by 3-foot bunk for sleeping in and storing all your stuff. So you get very close to the people around you, otherwise it's miserable. You also get used to there being no real free time. Your schedule is usually 6 hours on and 6 hours off, so you have limited time to eat and sleep before your next watch. Also, fresh water is only for drinking, so you take a lot of deck baths despite how cold it is. But it's also beautiful out there on the water. I've gotten to hear a whale song through the boards of my bunk as well as above the water. I've seen humpback whales breaching only 50 feet away from me during bow watch. It's an experience that very little can match. I found it interesting that after a few days, sea salt starts congealing on everything, even though you can't see ocean spray hitting it. The rain is nice because it cleans it off and you can sit down or hold railings without getting salt all over you for a few days. Time can get monotonous. You become like a dog, in that you look forward to lunch and dinner because that's about the most exciting part of the day. Your ratio of sunsets watched will skyrocket because after dinner you don't have anything to do really but smoke cigs and shoot the crap while watching the sunset. They're pretty amazing though, better than their land counterparts. Also, the stars at night. I've seen the Milky Way so bright that it was reflecting off the ocean. It's worth noting that experiences of working at sea will differ greatly, depending on what kind of vessel you're on, your position, rank, where you operate, and how long you spend away from home. I'd say it's the latter that most people will agree on, being away from home. This will vary from 4 months to 10 months a year for people. I do approximately 8 months away a year, 2 to 3 month contracts. Spending a large proportion of your time away from friends and family will change your life. You'll lose touch with people, relationships will be tough, and there's going to be a majority chance that you'll miss any wedding, funeral, or holiday. But those are the terms and conditions we all signed up for knowing this, although maybe not understanding it fully. As a trade, we do get benefits which one needs to decide themselves if they outweigh the negatives. Maybe not answering the question, but it's just my 2 cents. Of course, this time away would be a massive factor. Part of me wonders if it would have been worth it to do this for a few years immediately after I'd left high school to save up some money before uni, but there might be better options for gaining other skills too. Guys from the third world make up the majority of seafarers on UK-flagged ships, so most ship owners can cut costs. They're penny pinchers. 95% of all trade is done by sea. Most ships don't have internet, so it can be isolating. Most UK ships tend not to be registered in the UK for this reason. 90% of vessels I served on were registered in the Bahamas. You tickle your pickle any chance of solitude you get. Thus the main reason to keep those shower shoes handy. If you're on a smallish boat, how difficult day-to-day tasks can get. Making a cup of coffee in the galley without a window or small porthole in rough seas can be quite the challenge. Pouring anything with liquid in the galley is very, very difficult. It's just so easy to get everything everywhere. Try getting dressed in cramped quarters constantly being buffeted from one side to the other. Or taking a crap or a pee, you'll have to watch the level in the toilet and flush before it runs over the edge onto you in a rogue wave. The intimacy on board on most boats, there's very little privacy. You live with your crew every waking moment. You have to be very comfortable with yourself and not be easily bothered. Going upstairs in high seas is a real crapshoot. One second you feel like you weigh 3 times as much as usual, and then the next second you're lighter than air. Sea legs don't tend to disappear. I've been off the ship for about 6 years now, and I still walk with a swagger, apparently. Sleeping in high seas is nigh impossible. You'll flop about with the ship, and starfishing doesn't help after Force 10. Polish sailors will drink anything. Filipino sailors will hide everything everywhere. They also love singing Sinatra on karaoke. Often the cook is also a deckhand, so if it's been a busy day, prepare for crap food. Cargo watch sucks, deck watch sucks, it all sucks. Cue the gay jokes. Fresh milk is more important than nicotine for keeping the crew and officers from killing each other. The chief officer will always drink, even on a dry ship. A ship doesn't normally dictate its culture, the captain does. A crappy captain is crappy for everyone. Testing lifeboats is fun, getting an infection is not. Day trippers are fricking morons who don't follow the rules of the road. I'm not moving? Oh really? I've got 9,000 tons of steel and 4,500 bhp that says differently. Counting lighthouse flashes is quite fun. Anchor watch is the best. You sit on the bridge and you read and you smoke. You'll hear a lot of gay jokes. Sunny FM is the best place in the world. Duty-free cigs, booze, adult magazines, and knives. That's it. 5 litres of vodka, €3. 200 Marlboro, €2. German dungeon smut, 3 for 99 cents. Basically, money. I come from 6 generations of seamen, all with the same goal in life. Catch fish, sell them, get drunk, and get laid. Maybe not work, but I've spent more time on water than most. I've spent a year on my sailboat sailing down from Vancouver to Mexico and then cruising in Mexico for 6 months, most of it single-handed. It's not all sunshine and beer. When you're out there and things start to suck, it's not like you can go home. In the 1800s and the early 1900s, seafarers were idolized because everyone knew someone close that went to sea for a living. There was more understanding of what the working conditions were like among the general population. Now, people that go to sea are in a huge minority. People don't know anymore what it's like out there at sea. You don't know the bone-chilling cold there is at night in the North Pacific before the continental shelf drops. Hint, it pushes cold water up from the bottom of the sea to the top. You don't know what it's like to be out there in 12-foot sea with less than 6-second periods. That freaking sucks. You don't know what it's like to have monster waves at night that you can't see until they're right on top of you. You don't know what it's like to be in a shipping lane at night in the fog without radar. Yes, I'm stupid for that last one. But there's nothing so freeing as being alone out on deck on dog watch on a cold night with your cheeks cold and your nose slightly stuffed from watching the stars play in the night sky. Your only steering guide, the red-lit compass in front of you. But being out there on deck, slightly cold steering ship at night and seeing the stars dissolve into dawn is an amazing sight. I'd trade many a stormy night for that experience. Then there's also the relief of finally coming into harbour after an insane storm when everything is wet. You, your gear, your sleeping bag, your bunk, the whole boat. The feeling when you tie up, everyone gets their wet gear off and you sit in the saloon and make dinner while everyone is sore and tired. Arr. The feeling of seeing land for the first time in a long time, approaching an island or a coastline, doesn't look populated at all, just indescribably beautiful and innocent. Once you're within a mile or so, humanity and the scope of it takes over. Ah yes, the beautiful world, an accident of cosmic proportions or the hand of some divine being in all its glory, laid out for your own eye. Oh crap, they're other people. Damn. The shower water can be really hard and it will dry out your skin. Also, if you get hurt or family problems, toothache, or any other unplanned reason you need to get back to the beach, it can take hours to mobilize a chopper to get you. Then the travel time out could be hours and then back again. I work as an instrument technician on a production platform. The work is generally pretty easy, but sometimes it can be stressful and difficult at times. For example, working on big equipment with heavy wrenches, working with government inspectors, working in 90 degrees Fahrenheit plus 90% humidity in direct sunlight in your FRC overalls. You're working on equipment that if it fails can kill people or cause millions of dollars in deferred production. The work schedule is 14 on and 14 off as well. We're a lucky platform as we have two-man rooms, bunks, with our own bathroom as well. It's like a little hotel. We have satellite TV and Wi-Fi on the platform. I'm offshore right now. The funniest part is working and living with the same 50 guys every 2 weeks. They become your other family and your best friends. The food ranges from terrible to decent depending on the cook and how far away from the last food delivery you are. No beer or booze allowed. Dangers? Lots. Mostly from the process. Flammable hydrocarbons under pressure and physical dangers, falling from high places and crap falling on you. Much less chemical dangers than working at a refinery or chemical plant though. I don't like it that much. Being away from my significant other and daughter sucks, but the ratio of what I get paid to the actual amount of work I do is kind of silly. If I could find a land job that paid this much, I'd do it, but I'm making $120K plus now. I was on a carrier and a couple of things come to mind. 1. Life at sea is like the movie Groundhog Day. It's literally the same thing day in and day out, but every now and then you'll hit a port and go have a blast. 2. Don't be the dirty guy. Most sailors have to live in small compartments with upwards of 80 or so other people. Take a shower and change your sheets. 3. A person that you normally wouldn't be attracted to will eventually look like a supermodel the longer you're out at sea. It's a condition called boat goggles, and can only be cured by a port visit. 4. You work with people you like and quite a few that you hate. But if anyone needs your help, you give it without question because you're all alone out there. 5. Find a way to break the monotony. Many people work out, play cards, and take classes. I took 3 college classes while out at sea, just had to pay for the books. It helped me out when I left the Navy for college. I served on board a very small, independently deployed US Navy ship for almost 5 years. Just adding to what I read. We became a family. The old man was our dad, the XO was our nagging mum. We spent long nights up on watch, talking about some of the most intimate stuff guys can talk about. I'm a New Yorker and I got to spend quality time with Mormons, rednecks from Georgia, brothers from Mississippi, weirdos from Cali, Filipinos, etc. As those times got further in my rearview mirror, I got out like 15 years ago, and that's what I think I miss the most. Never thought I'd miss the balls to four and the crappy coffee. Teachers, what's the funniest thing to come out of one of your students' mouths? My first grade class was learning the word powerful. Kids came up with examples of powerful things and people, like elephants and Superman. Then one boy said, "Babies are powerful because they can cry and get whatever they want." "Teacher, I need a pencil." "Where do the pencils live?" "I have a bucket of sharpened pencils for them to use." "Pennsylvania?" I'm a teacher in Canada. Told the kids to name me 5 US states and their row could go out for recess first. A boy raised his hand and said, "Rattlesnake?" "What?" "Oh, snakes." "No, states. Name 5 states." T-bone?" "You're naming steaks." "States. States." Resource teacher was in the room and we were crying laughing. "Gas, liquid, solid, plasma, Bose-Einstein condensate." In 7th grade on a test, the question was, why do some people see technology as positive and others see the same technology as a problem? And a kid simply put, "Because some people are Amish?" I remember in year 3 we had to answer a logic question about why there might be uneven amounts of shoes at the door. I'd recently watched Titanic for the first time, so decided to write, "One person might be a one-legged working girl." It helped that my mum was a parent helper that day. I'm a white guy teaching ESL in Asia. My students were tasked to complete The old man's hair was as white as blank. One student asked if she could write down my name in that spot. Phys ed teacher here. I always wear shorts while teaching. Parent-teacher conferences roll around and a grade 1 student comes up to me with her parents. Mr. Smith, I've never seen you wear pants before. I've never responded quicker to a comment before in my life to clear that up. Reminds me of when my wife worked in an undisclosed location women's shelter. My daughter wanted to see where Mummy worked, but we could never go. I was picking up my daughter from school when she said, in the middle of the crowded school hall, Daddy, can we finally go and visit Mommy in the shelter? This reminds me of my nephew when he was 3. We dropped his mom, my sister, off at work, where she met a colleague outside and went inside with him. Back at home, my nephew reported to everyone that he'd seen Mommy go away with a man. Context is a very important thing, but its removal can lead to all sorts of marvelous situations like this. I still enjoy it when someone introduces me, their game leader in Dungeons & Dragons, as their dungeon master in public, to many raised eyebrows. Teaching English to middle schoolers in Korea. I asked, okay, what's another way you can express surprise in English? After going over expressions like, no way, are you serious? Are you kidding me? One kid yells from the very back of the room, what the frick? I did the same thing when I was little and still not fluent in English. My teacher said, what phrases can you make with beat? She was looking for something like beat up or beat at. I was reading a lot of stuff in English on the internet and without thinking much said, beat the crap out of. So proud of such a long phrase I'd achieved. I was sent out of the class. ESL teacher. I had my students do an activity where they had to give directions based off a map and situations I'd chosen. The final question was more complex, and one of my students wrote, way too difficult, take a cab. On a 3rd grade Charlotte's Web quiz, give 2 pieces of evidence that support this statement. Charlotte was a good friend to Wilbur. The answer given was, she comforted him and didn't let him become pork. You know what I don't get about that story? Why is the pig the one who becomes famous? The real news is the fricking super genius spider who knows how to think critically and write in English. Who cares what it thinks about the pig? I want to know its thoughts on the origins of reality. An elementary school kid saw the answer key. He swore he'd come up with answers may vary all on his own. What's sad is we had to grade a first semester chemistry test once at university that was made for the medical students. I don't remember if the medical students were at first semester too. They took the test together with the first semester chemistry students but had an alternative version anyway. Thing is, the grading sheet with the right answers was leaked beforehand. One student wrote the correct answer down and then wrote 1 point for every correct formula underneath his answer. How do you finish school without walking in front of a car when you're that damn stupid? I asked a 3-year-old what love was for a Valentine's Day card to his parents. His response? Maybe love is what tornadoes need. We call him the professor because he teaches us new things every day. In nutrition class at community college, the teacher asks, what's one of the first things you throw out of the window when you drink booze? And this kid just mumbles, standards. A fellow student once answered, in the head, to the question, where was JFK shot? Instead of the intended answer of Dallas. I mean, he was also shot in his car. I've got a story from my fiancé's childhood. They were testing her intelligence or awareness and showed her an image with a TV in the room. The TV was turned on, showing a cartoon, and had a plant on top of it. The question was, what's on the television? The answer was, a plant. Apparently, she kept insisting in utter frustration until the administrator bothered to look at the image and not the answer sheet. Reminds me of a friend's story. I don't know about public schools, but for sure at private schools you get a little quiz-type test with a teacher before they confirm you're ready for kindergarten. One of the things he had to do was identify pictures. He aced the section except for the picture of the airplane. He looked and thought hard and then burst into tears saying, I don't know what that is. Turns out his dad worked for Boeing, and he was trying and failing to discern exactly what model plane the super generic picture was depicting. This is very cute, bless the little guy's heart. Probably trying to count the windows and work out whether it was a 737 or 747, coming up short for both. Why are you late? The bell went off before I got here. Why are you late? I had trouble with my bike. What was the trouble? I didn't get on it early enough. college professor teaching developmental psychology. At the end of the semester, I asked all the students to write down the most interesting or important thing they've learned. One wrote, "Babies are stupid and old people still do the deed." It's not wrong, kinda covers the lifespan. My dad used to coach basketball and was trying to get kids into a 2-3 zone. He yelled out to one kid in particular who was in man-to-man, "What defense are we playing?" The kid slaps the floor and says, "Tough defense." I teach forensic science. We were going to be using iodine to fume fingerprints. Iodine vapor is no joke, so I terrify the students and use only 2 volunteers with goggles and respirators at the chemical hood. But we still go over the MSDs, PPE, and equipment. I spend maybe 5 minutes talking about everything and the chemical hood to my class of 30. Towards the end, "So, someone tell me, what is a hood?" A hand shot up. "Yes, student. It's like the place where you grew up." I facepalm, the class laughs, and I'm unable to pivot his answer in the moment. He's on the spectrum and wasn't trying to be funny. This is intentional, but I teach a foreign language, so when I introduce the word for "I don't know," I call on a student who typically gets answers wrong, and ask them to translate the word as if he or she should know it. When the student inevitably responds with, "I don't know," I tell them they're right, and the look on their face is always priceless. In a class that deals with electricity, I asked the students to name a good conductor. They said Leonard Bernstein. "As a music teacher, this brings me great joy." Asked what is the moral of the story in The Little Engine That Could, I got the answer, "Don't pick up hitchhikers." To refresh your memory, the engine had trouble getting up the hill because he had taken on several more passengers due to their train breaking down. What side of the road do people in France drive on? Miss, they drive on both sides." I'm not the teacher, but I witnessed this in class. Sociology professor asks, "Why do you conform?" Student, "It's always been my goal in life to blend in." Professor, "No more questions for you." In German, there's this little drawing game called Das Haus vom Nikolaus, consisting of drawing a house without lifting the pen or drawing the same line twice. Well, the act of drawing something without lifting your pen is called in einem Zug zeichnen, which literally translates to drawing in a train. So yes, one kid actually drew a house in a train. Okay, kids, name something living. A fox. Name something non-living. Fox crap. I wrote an exam where the question was, can you name the 3 models of DNA replication? She wrote, no. I mean, that was bad question writing on your part. While something like name 3 types of DNA replication would still result in the student writing no, you should recognize that this would be equivalent to leaving the question blank with the original wording. It was a valid answer to your question. It's not a valid response to the above rewording. Makes me remember something I did when I was in grade 2. The student teacher took us into a private room one by one for eye exams. I've never taken an eye exam before, and it wasn't really explained to me what was happening. I was just sat down and asked to read the first line of the chart, then the second, then the third. By the time it came to the 4th line, I was like, it's too small for me to read. 1 minute, please. Then I got up, walked over to the board, and started reading the letters. Apparently, that's not how you do eye exams. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I teach English to Vietnamese kids. I asked, what is the population of Vietnam? The kid quickly surveyed the room and said, more than 15. This guy is going places. I can finally answer one of these. The student is reading a science magazine during a bit of downtime. Student, whoa, yo, mister, you mean to tell me pollen is like a flower splooge? Sort of. Man, I be getting that crap in my face all the time. Well, he's not wrong. Most of us are catching steaming floral loads to the face every day of spring. Some of us love it, and it makes others of us sick. Kind of like transmitted diseases. Fun thought. I asked my class, when is the time you've used integrity? My student answered, I wash my hands after going to the bathroom, even though no one's there. I don't think anyone I work with has any of this kind of integrity. Something my brother answered for homework. My brother was in year 1 and his homework was to draw a balloon blown up. He drew a picture with lots of squiggly shapes spread out across the paper. He took it as the balloon blown up like a bomb, so he drew the leftovers of an exploded balloon. His teacher loved it and gave him full marks. Not a teacher, but a witness. In high school history class, the teacher asked, "What was the peace treaty that ended World War II?" This was a trick question because there wasn't a single treaty that ended the war, and this one kid blurted out, "The Manhattan Project." The teacher laughed so hard that he went and got the other history teacher and had the kid tell him the answer too. Teaching grade 5. Students were fooling around during group work, so I said sarcastically, "Do I need to stand here and watch you do your work?" To which the student responded even more sarcastically, "Well, you don't have to stand, you can grab the chair and sit." I can't remember which grade it was, but probably the 2nd or 3rd grade. Teacher was asking something relatively simple and no one wanted to or knew the answer. "What's going on here? There should be hands up like trees in the forest." "Maybe this is a logging area," said the joker of our class. I had this pretty attractive history teacher. She was talking about jewels or something at a museum and I blurted out, "Mrs. Smith, I can show you some real nice jewels." And everyone bust out laughing and the teacher got very red and flustered and embarrassed, and I looked confused because I meant I would show her big diamonds and rubies to jokingly woo her, but the class and the teacher took it as I was referencing my nether regions. I was teaching kindergarteners about needs versus wants, and I showed pictures of things and we talked about why it was or wasn't. After a picture of a puppy came up, everyone but one kid said want, so I asked him to explain his answer. He just says, "But what if you're blind?" Good answer, you win, kid. I once drew a woolly mammoth picture because I couldn't remember the name of it for a quiz question in science class. I got the point for it. I worked in a special needs class for a year, and there was one kid with a textbook case of Asperger syndrome. Very bright, very tough nut to crack. I tried to tell him a corny joke once, and he was not having it. "Why did the chicken cross the road?" "He likely had business over there or was compelled by force." Well, okay. Easily my favorite memory of that class. My friend's also on the spectrum. It's led to similar punchlines to classic corny jokes. "Why don't people play poker in the jungle?" "Because the undiscovered tribes who inhabit the jungle have had no contact with Western culture. Therefore, they would never have heard of any game called poker, let alone know how to play it." Trying to delicately explain to a 3-year-old why she should be kind to her mum. "You shouldn't say those things to mummy when she's sick. Who looks after you when you're sick and makes you feel better?" "The doctor." "Well, frick." I gave a group of 2nd graders a worksheet about main idea and detail. In the instructions, they were told to circle the main idea and underline the details. One child returned the paper to me very promptly, having underlined the phrase, "the main idea," and having circled the details in the instructions. She knew exactly what she was doing when she turned it in. She was a clever one. She did just fine when I asked her to complete the assignment as expected. I said, "The quiz tomorrow will be on," and my student shouted, "Paper!" Everyone laughed and I rephrased the question. One of my kids couldn't remember what country wasn't a part of the UK on a test, so she put Mexico. I teach English in Japan. When teaching my students, I asked, "What do we say when someone is being too loud?" And one smartass yells, "Shut up forever!" I've never said this, no clue where he learned it either. I nearly lost my crap, but he wasn't wrong. The correct answer is, "Be quiet, please," which I told him was more polite. He just grinned as if he knew, but didn't care. Smart kid, I'll miss him when I change jobs. I get this pretty often from my students. My favorite is when I say, "Please be quiet" to new students and they ask their friends what I said. Usually someone will come back with, "Shut up." I teach and coach baseball. After our short stop got thrown out on the 2nd for the 3rd out, I told someone to pick up Will, in baseball terms meaning get his glove and hat so he can go out to the field. This kid who was new to baseball, a big lineman type of football player, claps his hands and goes to the shortstop. "It's okay, Will, you'll get him next time." I cried laughing. Poor William. Well, at least he didn't get hauled over the lineman's shoulder and carried off the pitch. I'm a teacher, but my best answer to this is in high school. An English teacher was asking about the poetic reasoning behind why the moon is always used in a feminine context. Guy behind me says, "Because they're both on a 28-day cycle?" When I used to teach anatomy, "Anthony, name this bone." Femur. "Is it a left femur or a right femur?" "Yeah." My godfather is a lobster fisherman, and all of the kids in the family would go out on the boat with him from time to time. There was a running joke with my uncle, dad, and godfather. They would get a kid to bait a trap, then applaud them for being a master baiter. My cousin went back to school after summer vacation, and when the teacher asked what she did that summer, she proudly stated, "I became a..." Well, you get the picture. Not a teacher, but just a witness to this hilarity. In science class in high school, our teacher was talking about electricity and lightning and the effects of being shocked. He asked if anyone happens to know what is the first sense you lose when struck by lightning. Without missing a beat, a girl put her hand up and answered, in all honesty, "Your sense of humor?" The class had to stop for a few minutes until everyone could regain their composure. This one kid twice on the same quiz. First question, describe the bus ride at the beginning of the chapter. It was a bus ride filled with action, but also with emotion. Second question, what happens at the end of the story? The story ends. That kid is going to be a politician someday. My wife is an elementary school teacher. The kids were practicing their 2 times tables, and the question said something along the lines of, John lives in his house with his mum, dad, brother, and grandpa. How many total hands do the people in John's house have altogether? The answer they were looking for was 10, and they wanted the students to show that 2 times 5 equals 10. This young man instead wrote, "Not enough information. What if someone lost a hand?" He wasn't wrong. My wife just wrote "good thinking" on his assignment and gave him full credit. The kid was bright and knew his times tables, so that wasn't an issue. She also had his older brother as a student and said they were both smart, but jokesters. My wife now teaches kindergarten, this was when she taught 3rd grade, and said she misses the funny responses on tests. She used to have a full Word document of the funniest answers. There was a buddy of mine in college, Jay, who was legendary for his witty responses in class. We were training to be RAs, and the residential life person asked, "What are some things that, as an RA, you shouldn't do in your dorm room?" People were saying stuff like drinking, etc. Jay raises his hand and says, "Practicing medicine without a license." The trainer was like, yeah, that's true. The same guy was in a film class. The teacher asks, "What technique defined the scene we just watched?" Jay raised his hand, gets called on and says, "Long, awkward silences." "Teacher, could you give an example?" Jay then proceeded to look awkwardly at the teacher, opening his mouth to say something periodically for 20 seconds. I co-teach a class and do a lot of the grading. Kids will write, "I love teacher A," and I'm like, "Ha, this is teacher B, nice try, losers." Not especially funny, but I've thought about it for a long time afterwards. I was substituting for an elementary ESL class. There was one young boy from Africa. We asked the kids in the class what 3 wishes they would like if they could have anything. This young man said, 1. New shoes for my mother. 2. School all year. 3. Roast chicken for dinner. Most of the other wishes had to do with toys or candy. This kid was focused. We had a quiz about the 1960s in what I think was either my sophomore or junior year. One of the questions was, John F. Kennedy and Robert F. Kennedy were the first brothers to do… and we had to fill in the blank. We were doing a peer edit of the quiz the next day with another class's quiz. When my teacher got to the JFK and RFK question, someone raised their hand and said, "My guy wrote down JFK and RFK were the first 2 brothers to do Marilyn Monroe." Mr. Q's reply was, "Technically that is kind of correct, but dock a point off anyway because the real answer is run for president." In conclusion, the Kennedy brothers' claim to fame isn't running for office, it was doing Marilyn Monroe. I was in a special ed room where the children were sorting nouns. The picture of the mailman went in the people column, the baseball went in the things column, and so on. There were several pictures of animals, and a little girl, who wore shorts with puppies and horses on them almost daily, sorted the animals in the people column and was the only one in class to have done so. I pulled her aside to ask why she didn't sort the animals in the things column. I didn't tell her she was wrong, I just wanted to see her train of thought. And she started giggling and burst out laughing, saying, "How is an animal like a thing? Animals are alive. Cows can't be like a desk." And she's cracking up because she thinks it's so silly that people view animals as things. I asked her if someone taught her that or if she just knew it, and she said it was just something she knows. It was touching and innocent and very sweet. I love animal lovers. What celebrity behaved like a complete jerk to you in public? Wayne Brady screamed at my sister for taking his picture in Vegas. She wasn't taking his picture, he just walked into the shot. He freaked out, screaming that he wanted her to show him that she was deleting it. She was trying to explain that she didn't even know he was there, and showed him the picture that only had a sliver of him in it when she looked through the shots. He continued to berate her about not respecting his privacy in the middle of the Vegas Strip. She was in tears, apologizing for doing nothing wrong, and he never acknowledged he was in the wrong and continued to badmouth her as he stormed away. Can't watch him anymore. Mark Wahlberg did an appearance at his brother's restaurant. He refused to take pictures with anyone taller than him. Now, this I can believe. Met Tiger Woods when I was 15. He slapped my hat out of my hand. A different golfer whom I didn't know ran up, picked up my hat, and asked if his signature would be okay. I agreed, but I don't know who he was or what his name was, but my grandpa was pleased upon seeing it. Pauly Shore. It was mid-90s in New York City, and my wife and I were at a very popular Asian restaurant with a huge wait time. He walks in with an entourage and tries to worm his way ahead of everyone else. He tried to play the "don't you know who I am" card. Hostess was having none of it, said, "Don't know, don't care, you'll wait." They left in a huff. I know this won't come as a surprise, but Steven Seagal used to frequent a restaurant I worked at. Guy was a colossal piece of crap. He treated his wonderful family like crap, and it was obvious he was cheating on his wonderful wife with the Asian nanny. This fricking moron would come into a 10-table restaurant, all 6'5" and 300 pounds of him, wearing a golden kimono in the South, and would wonder why people were looking at him. So he made us take the entry partition down and put it around his table. He was an absolute trash human being. Also met Peyton Manning one night after the Super Bowl he lost to the Saints. This was at an ultra-high-end golf course, and we were not allowed to act like we recognized celebrities, which was more awkward than anything. Anyway, he walked up and ordered a beer and introduced himself, but I was already turning to get the beer as he stuck out his hand to shake my hand and tell me who he was. As if I didn't know who Peyton Manning was in the grounds when I saw his forehead pull into the parking lot. So I blew off Peyton Manning for a handshake. How many of you losers can say that? Great frickin' guy, though. Well, the narrator thought that maybe the author was drawing too many conclusions about Steven Seagal, but after a quick Google I can see that he is, if anything, painting him as less of a D-bag than the man himself often behaved as in public. Didn't happen to me, but I had a physics teacher in high school who sat next to Bill Nye on a plane once. Apparently, he was super unpleasant to be around. Every time this thread comes up, James Corden ends up taking it over. Hey James, you won't remember me, but me and my friends sat at a table next to you and Harry Styles and some others in Manchurian Legends in London's Chinatown about 6 years ago. We didn't bother you, but you were a massively entitled C-word who yelled and treated the waitstaff like crap. And when one of my party politely suggested you calm down, you got really aggressive and threatening, in a chubby way like a boozy panda. So my question is this: why did Harry seem so cool while you were such a massive, throbbing eggplant? This is from his AMA thread, by the way, literally hundreds of posts like this from ex-fans, staff, and other actors. I haven't met a rude celebrity yet, but Stanley's security at Calgary Comic-Con a few years back was fricking brutal. The guy acted like he was a fricking mercenary. Stanley would sit in a chair and you'd come close to him to get your photo op, and Stan let me be pretty well arm-to-arm close, and his security guard yelled at me and asked Stan if he authorized me to be that close. Even the photographer looked at the security guy like he was crazy. But at the same Comic-Con, meeting Norman Reedus, Stephen Yeun, and Robert Englund, Freddy Krueger, was amazing. They're all super awesome and tried to have a legitimate conversation with you. Steve Yeun even complimented my glasses. 10 out of 10, best con for me. I was the butthole in my store. I saw Don Cheadle at an airport and was thinking about Ocean's 11 and said to my friend, "Dude, it's Bernie Mac." And he looked back and said, "Nah, I'm the other black guy from Ocean's 11, but at least you liked the movie." Jared Leto hit on my girlfriend at the time and called me fat. His brother Shannon was super nice though. At least he didn't tattoo fat on your forehead. He was a total rude, aloof jerk, and his brother was super lovely, warm, and sweet. Jimmy Fallon. I liked his show, and one day while I was getting a tour at NBC Studios, he bumped into me and turned around and said sorry, and then flipped me off, and it's not like I got in his way. He walked into me from behind. David Cross is pretty miserable. He's from Atlanta, and his sister runs a food truck in town. Her recipes were all named after David Cross or Arrested Development type stuff, so my wife and I, being fans of David, asked about it, and she told us she was his sister. So for months, we'd chat her up anytime we ordered food from her truck, and eventually David was in town. She invites us to come to the food truck to meet him, so we bring a poster from the early 2000s and are super pumped to meet him. We get there and she's very anxious and hesitant to introduce us. Weird, but okay. No, it's okay, I'll introduce you. She does, and he was incredibly dismissive and unpleasant. Never heard of anyone having a good interaction with him. Our best interaction was with Conan O'Brien. He was a total class act. Chatted him up in a bathroom line of all places and said my wife and I were huge fans. He said we should come on by the table to chat. I told him we didn't want to interrupt his dinner, but he insisted, then asked if he wanted pictures, and was super cool. I'll say on behalf of Cross that I listened to him on Andy Richter's 3 Questions, and he says he feels bad about being a jerk to his fans when he was younger. He admits actively being a jerk, but he also said he didn't really know how to talk to people at all. He said he'd get weird when people complimented him or said they liked something. I thought it was kind of good of him to admit he'd been a jerk in the past, instead of continuing to be a jerk and just thinking his fans are buttholes. Kurt Vonnegut. I had to get in touch with him frequently for work at a non-profit for several years. He was never once even vaguely polite. I tried to bum a cigarette off Kurt Vonnegut once, when he was guest professor at my old college. Before I could even say a word, he looked up and fricking growled at me. So naturally, I panicked and fled. At the end of the year, the school paper did an interview with him and he was like, for some reason, hardly anyone came to my office hours. Yeah, Kurt, it's because you growl at people. Bobby Flay. We paid hundreds of dollars to go to a fancy event he was participating in. Waited for a long time just to meet him and say hi, and he looked at us and walked away. He was a real jerk about it too. Bill Nye the Science Guy. I was on a field trip in middle school and our teacher saw him. She politely asked if he could say something to us or just say hi. We always watched him in science class. He told her to F off and basically berated her for bothering him and asking him to speak to a bunch of kids. I'm not sure if he was just having a bad day, but it was not the best experience as a child. Some narrator's insights halfway through the script. Bill Nye's name came up a lot in this story grouping, which may be upsetting to some people, but there it is. Apparently, just don't talk to him if you see him in public. I won't do any more of his stories unless they're particularly juicy. Me and my sister saw Alec Baldwin, Tina Fey, and Salma Hayek on the street when we were eating lunch. They were just coming out of a car, about to go into some building next to us. We had no idea why they were together, but in retrospect, it was definitely because they were filming 30 Rock together. My sister said, "Oh my god, is that Tina Fey?" And Alec Baldwin turned around and went right in her face and said, "Don't freaking say that. Don't speak to us. Why would you say something like that? You can't speak to us, not now." But it didn't really end there. He yelled again at us outside the building, saying, "Don't look over here. Turn around and eat your food. F off." He sounded genuinely furious at us, almost like he wanted us to yell back and start something with him. Honestly, my sister was on the verge of tears. It was horribly embarrassing. Everyone knows now that Alec Baldwin has a history of screaming at people, but at the time we had no idea. Don't get me wrong, my sister shouldn't have yelled at Tina Fey like that, but the way Alec snapped was straight up scary, like he was about to physically attack her. Salma Hayek and some other lady who I didn't recognize came over and apologized to us. She asked if we wanted her to go and get Tina and get her autograph because apparently Tina felt bad, but we said no. She then talked to us about the food we were eating, which was Mexican food, and we ended up having a brief conversation about New York's lack of quality Mexican food. She was incredibly charismatic and sweet. My dad has been a radio personality for over 30 years and worked in country music for over half of that time. He gets to meet celebrities semi-regularly. Apparently Keith Urban was really nice, Carrie Underwood was kind of mediocre because he caught her right after her performance and she was tired, but Kenny Chesney puts the D in D-bag. Direct quote from my dad. Kenny promised to sign some pictures, t-shirts, etc. for a couple of kids who won a game through the radio. Kenny instead took a bunch of groupies into one of the back rooms of the studio with a bottle of whiskey and locked the door. When my dad tried to get him to open the door and fulfill his end of the deal, he called the cops on my dad and he was lucky enough to get a cop who was a good acquaintance. Cop said there wasn't much he could do other than make Kenny leave. So that's what he did. Kids never got their stuff signed, so my dad gave them some coupons for free pizza. He said that after a few years, other radio hosts told him they had similar encounters with Kenny. I've had the perfect combination of bad star, good star. It was at Dragon Con, maybe 2005. I'm going through the big autograph room waiting to get David Carradine's autograph. He looked so mad. He didn't say a word as I told him how much I enjoyed his work. Okay, I get it. Maybe he was having a bad day. Next to Mr. Carradine was Mark Singer, star of Beastmaster, V, among other things. Mr. Singer is smiling, talking to people as they go by. He looks genuinely happy to be there. Suddenly, a woman behind me stumbled and dropped a huge stack of materials she wanted autographed. Mr. Carradine looked down on her like she was a bug. Mark Singer jumped over his table and started helping the woman pick up her things. Didn't hesitate one moment, just started helping. That's when I decided if I ever became famous, I was going to try and be like Mark Singer, not David Carradine. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I sat next to Rosario Dawson on a flight from LA to Austin while she was shooting Death Proof. I didn't recognize her and she kept trying to strike up conversations while I was studying for a Cal 2 final. I was a butthole to her until it came out that she was Rosario Dawson. Then we had a very pleasant conversation. I regret meeting her because I am the jerk. Prince Andrew. Spent a lot of time around him 10 years ago, working at private school events he attended. The guy was a total prick. Maybe he would have been nicer to you if you were younger. I met Shane Dawson at a restaurant I used to work at. He used to come in a few times a year with his fiancée and in-laws. He's a prick. None of my servers liked him or wanted to serve his family, and I damn near had to fight some little girls off the property because they wouldn't leave without seeing him. I sat near him at Denny's in Santa Monica around midnight once. Must have been back when he had longer hair, and I don't think he was dating Ryland yet, but I'd already stopped watching years prior. He was alone with his laptop, didn't even realize until my boyfriend pointed him out, so I looked behind and indeed it was Shenanigans. Can't remember a single time he thanked our server, although while we were there she was just refilling his coffee. Apparently some people don't feel the need to thank their servers every single time they visit their table. Afterwards I realized he'd been live tweeting about the other couple a few booths down from us who were seated closer to him. We narrowly avoided him talking crap about us to thousands of people. My gosh. Met Dennis Leary. Butthole. Figures. Mike Rowe was super cool though. Reggie Jackson. He was a childhood idol of mine. I got the opportunity to get a photo with him at some booth at a trade show called Internet World. Years ago during the .com boom. No one was in line to get pictures with him, so I walked up to get a photo while he was apparently trying to get the girls in the next booth over to sleep with him. He acted all bugged that I asked for a photo, even though that's what he was hired for, and rolled his eyes. I guess he thought I was crimping his style just by showing up in line to get a picture. I tossed the picture in the trash once I got it. Later that day, I got a ball signed by Steve Garvey, who was super nice. He replaced Reggie Jackson as my hero that night. Ace Frehley of Kiss. It was at a rock and roll, TV, movie memorabilia convention in the mid-90s, shortly before the Kiss reunion, and he clearly didn't want to be there. He didn't talk to fans, didn't say hi, heck, he didn't even look at you when you came to his table. He just signed whatever you placed in front of him, and you were hustled away afterwards. On the other hand, Adam Batman West was at the next signing table and he was totally cool guy. Shook hands, chatted with everyone, signed whatever we wanted, posed for pictures, etc. Meeting him more than made up for Ace's surly, hungover D-bag act. A famous soap opera star in my country, he came into the Dairy Queen I was working at. I didn't know who he was and my co-worker started hyperventilating and went into the back. The guy was rude and when I handed him his cone he said, "Is that all?" Like he expected extra because he was famous. Yeah dude, if you order one scoop, you get one scoop. Didn't find out he was famous until he left and my co-worker came back to the front. "Sir, this is a Dairy Queen, not a drama queen." I've forgiven this particular author for not giving us a name purely on the basis of that clapback added by the subsequent comment. Thank you, oh sassy one. Diana Ross. I worked in a health club in a hotel across the street from a stadium when I was young. She came in, looked at the pool, which was a really decent lap pool, and said, "My bathtub is bigger than this." I replied, "Go back to your bathtub then." She wanted me fired instantly. HR told me to go home for 2 days because if they fired everyone she wanted fired, the hotel wouldn't have any staff. I met James Brown back in the 80s when I lived in Vale. The man was dissatisfied with everything and generally drunk. Absolute flip side was meeting Mr. Rogers when I was at Pitt. That man was the real deal. I wouldn't say disappointing as I was never eager to meet him, but Drake. Drake was just unprofessional and egotistical when I worked with him both times. This was before he got big, first award show type level. He's told me to F off directly and I watched his mum calm him down from a tantrum. My fiancé is a chef at a pretty prominent boutique hotel restaurant in Philly. He says the two worst guests were Ariana Grande, made not one but two servers cry, and the Rolling Stones. The best guests were Sylvester Stallone, Pink, Lady Gaga, and Guy Fieri. Anyone from Pittsburgh can tell you that Ben Roethlisberger is a horrible person. I have a friend who owns a bar on the south side, and he has, on multiple occasions, just walked into the bar and said, "My friends and I are drinking for free tonight." He also told Arnold Palmer's grandson that he doesn't sign autographs if he's not getting paid to do so. Legend has it that he earned a pretty nasty verbal beatdown from Palmer, and apparently he's banned from his golf course. Arnold Palmer, on the other hand, was an incredibly nice guy. Bill Cosby, even before all his real horrible stuff got publicly known, he came to a restaurant in DC where I was a hostess. I came to get him for his table and he said, "Do you not need a college degree for this job?" No man, have you never met a server before? I was sitting undressed in a Korean day spa steam room when a guy who looked just like Lawrence Fishburne walked in and sat down across from me. I was there with two friends and we were talking and you could tell we were all like, could that really be Morpheus? We just kept talking and he was listening to whatever story we were reminiscing about, and then he smiled at something we said and we saw the tooth gap. We all played it cool though and didn't say anything until after he left. 10 out of 10, a nice guy to hang out undressed with. The lead singer of Smash Mouth showed me a picture of him sticking a beer bottle into a Brazilian woman. Ruined Astro Lounge for me. I met Wayne Gretzky once. Guy's a bit of a chode, to be honest. I caught him on a bad day. We all get like that. His father, rest in peace, was so much cooler than he was. On the flip side, my brother met Gord Downey, also rest in peace, at a get-together. He was with his girlfriend and her family at one of her parents' friends' place. They were all sitting, chatting, having a good time. Out of nowhere, Gord walks in like it's nothing. Apparently the owners of the house were friends with Gord. My brother, being a huge Tragically Hip fan, was internally freaking out, but he kept cool on the outside so as to not bother this guy. He talked with him for a while about sports and things like that. Towards the end of the night when my brother was getting ready to leave, Gord stopped him and shook his hand while saying, "Thank you for pretending not to know who I am." Deion Sanders. I interviewed him at an NFL military event like 8 or 9 years ago, and he was a prick the whole time. He threw my lav mic on the ground when he was done instead of placing it in my outstretched hand. I was also active duty military at the time, and the event was on a ship. Hey Sanders, if you hear this, F you, dude. F you. Yeah, but he was also capable of being a jerk and throwing mics to the ground at MLB events. You gotta respect that kind of versatility. This guy expected my seat on a plane. He was our local news anchor. Actually said, "I may look familiar." I said, "You're a merchant banker?" Justin Timberlake. This was when I was working a drive-thru at Burger King around 2002 to 2003 or so. He came up at the drive-thru with someone else driving, but he was sticking his head out like, "Hey, hey, hey!" at us. I didn't really recognize him, but he asked if we knew who he was. I said no, but my coworker said yes. Then he looked at me like, "You don't know?" and was just really confused. My coworker said it was Justin Timberlake and he said, "Yeah, hello, come on man." Then he just sort of had small talk. He asked us how work was, how our day was. But here's the thing. The entire time he's leaning all the way over the driver, who was clearly horribly uncomfortable and a bit crushed by him leaning over on him. He asked if I was from the Middle East and I said no. He clearly didn't listen and said, "Yeah, that sucks. Sorry about the whole Afghanistan thing." He asked if we wanted his autograph. We said sure. He wrote it down and gave it to us. He then said bye and left. It was all in all a really funny experience, and I try not to let it influence my view of him because he was clearly on something, but he just came off like a big goofy attention-loving silly Billy the entire time. Met Morgan Freeman at a Bed Bath & Beyond. He was shopping for a teapot on a lower shelf and stood up right when I almost walked into him, and I was like, "Wow, you look just like Morgan Freeman." And he said without skipping a beat, "If I was Morgan Freeman, wouldn't I be in Hollywood or something?" And the voice made me now like 99.9% certain it was him, and I was like, "I guess you would. Enjoy your time here." I don't regret meeting him, and I don't think he was being a jerk. I just thought it was so Morgan Freeman of him to have a line like that to make you wonder if you met Morgan Freeman or just a guy that likes to act like a character in a bunch of his movies. What's the dumbest thing a criminal has done or said to a cop? I read a theft suspect her Miranda rights, to which she stated in a recorded interview, I'm invoking my right to silence and a lawyer because I stole a lot of crap and I don't want to incriminate myself. I stopped someone who was in the area of a load of theft from motor vehicles. After a bit of questioning, I carried out a search and found numerous wallets, phones, and other things. He claimed that all of the cards were his, all 13 different identities. To be fair, he stuck to his story. He carried it all the way to court, going not guilty. Okay then, Mr. Jones, you're under arrest for 12 counts of theft. Mr. Fletcher, you're also under arrest for 12 counts of theft. Mrs. Rodriguez, you are under arrest for 12 counts of theft. Stopped a lady for speeding 15 miles per hour over the speed limit. I asked what her reason could be for going so fast. She said, I live here. You can't give me a speeding ticket. I live just down the street. I live here. This is unbelievable. I live here. So my personal favorite was when a bloke on a motorbike swerved in front of our squad car and crashed. We hopped out, picked the bike up off him, it was pinning his leg, and asked, You alright, mate? To which he replied, Of course I'm alright. What do you mean? Well, you just fell off your bike, mate. No, I didn't. He just kept insisting that there was no way he could have crashed, and it must have been someone else. I called the cops on my roommate in college because she tried to attack me and she wouldn't cooperate with the cops, so she got cuffed and was screaming about how she was gonna beat me good. They were like, Yeah? You're gonna beat her good? And she was agreeing. In court later, the judge asked her, So you think it's okay to beat someone good if they turn your TV off when you're not there? And she nodded and said, Yes, I do. And the judge just deep sighed. She got a big fat fine because they couldn't prove assault. She got charged with something lesser that had a max fine of about $1,500. Funny thing was, she had a pay or appear date for like 3 days before the one she was assigned at our trial. So they agreed to just merge the 2 dates so she wouldn't have to appear twice. So that means she already went to court for something else and got fined for something else too. Folks, in case you were wondering, if you blurt something like this out by accident one time, it might be in your best interest to revise your statement further down the line. People say honesty is the best policy. You can always be honest about seeing a better way forward. Friend who is an officer told me this one a little while ago. He was driving near where a known car thief lived, so he stops by. SUV in the driveway with no tags. My friend walks up, runs the VIN, stolen. Now the property had a house on it, and then out back a small mother-in-law suite where said thief lived. Officer walks out back, knocks, and then hears a car door. Officer starts running, engine starts, and yeah, the thief is driving away in the stolen SUV. Officer knows where he ditches stolen cars at, so has an officer stake out that area. Sure enough, 2 hours later, the SUV rolls up with a Jeep following it. SUV driver wipes down the dash, wipes down the outside door handle, and gets in the Jeep. Officer pulls them over and arrests them both. Why both? The Jeep is stolen too. Officer runs her license, sends another officer to her address, and guess what? She had a stolen car at her place too. 3 stolen cars recovered, 2 people in jail, all because one officer decided to stop by a thief's last address. Not my story, but my police officer friend's. He had gone in to arrest someone for dealing substances. He was in full uniform while someone else had already been there undercover. The substance dealer looks at the undercover cop and says, You're undercover. Yes, well done. He looks at my uniformed friend and says, You're undercover too. He was not. Then he looks at someone else, not a police officer at all, and says, And you. The guy responds with, How am I an undercover police officer? I just bought substances off of you. And that's how they made an unexpected arrest at that raid. Not a police officer, but my father was a 911 dispatch operator. My father was working one night and he gets a call from a man who was obviously drunk. 911, what's your emergency? Yeah, I think I just heard a red car crash. You heard a red car crash? Yeah. Okay, police are on their way. Click. My dad finds out later that this guy was driving drunk and crashed his car not far from his house. The guy decides to get out of his car, stumble home, and dial 911 to report the fact that he'd had a car crash. In his drunken mind, he figured he'd report the crash as someone who heard it and he'd get off somehow. But he had to specify the color because apparently a red car crashing sounds different than a blue car crashing. Student paramedic here once went to a family with a 2-year-old with difficulty breathing. Walked into the house to find 4 people and the parents smoking green herb with the baby in the room. The baby was crying, coughing and spluttering. Couldn't believe my eyes. My mentor swiftly rang for police backup and we filled out some safeguarding paperwork concerns. Pretty sure they arrested them on scene for neglect. Dad's a detective. Had a murder case where a dog walker found a severed head in a park. Over the rest of the morning, they found a full set of chopped up body parts around that park. A trail of blood led from each part and they followed them all the way back to a nearby house. In through the door and up the stairs to a room covered in blood with a guy asleep in a bed. Turns out this guy had got drunk with a friend, had an argument, killed him, chopped him up and hid his body parts in the park before passing out back at the house. Police caught him literally red-handed. Apparently he was really confused how they got him so quickly. I was police at the time. In the middle of the night, my partner and I found a car in a cemetery. Stolen cars were dumped there regularly. The car had its windows down and it had only recently been left there. It was still warm to touch. It didn't flag up as stolen, and through the window I could see a crystal pipe in plain view. That gives us the ability to search the car. Inside we find a bunch of crystal pipes, 3.5 grams of crystal, a small amount of green herb, and a gat. There was also a tablet phone that was unlocked, and while we were searching the car, the tablet kept on receiving messages from people trying to score crystal. I had a quick look through the phone and was able to figure out that the owner of the car had come out from the city. I worked rurally at the time. They'd come out to make a score from one of the local gangs. But the gang didn't want her turning up, so arranged to meet her at the cemetery and conduct business somewhere else. I leave a business card under the wipers, not my card but the station's, and on the back I wrote that she, the owner of the car, should come down to the station if she wants to get her stuff back. And sure enough she did, at 9 in the morning, high as all heck, looking for her crystal and gat. All the people from To Catch a Predator. NBC has online transcripts and they still come up with the stupidest excuses. The narrator can't really repeat any of those transcripts here, but I encourage you to read them if you want a rather morbid laugh about how people who have explicitly tried to proposition minors try to pass it off as something else. If they were telling the truth, it would be an almost Tobias Funke level of unfortunate phrasing. Suspect was caught for substance possession on the streets, and we were talking to the prosecutor to get a warrant for his house. Somehow he managed to call his wife without our notice, and as we realized what had happened, we heard him saying, "Honey, go take the fish out of the fridge." After we got the warrant and searched his house, there was his fridge full of speed and the plate with fish which his wife had prepared for his return thrown in the trash. Retired cop here. Boy, do I have stories. One idiot move a guy made was to steal some poor girl's car. It was her first car, she worked full-time, was a sweet little thing and we felt so bad, she was crushed. Also in the car for some reason was her cell phone. So a colleague who has the gift of talking crap really well calls the number. A guy answers. It goes a little something like this. "Motherfricker, you stole my girlfriend's car." The answer went, "Which I will frick you up and then frick your girlfriend." "Bring it, motherfricker. No cops, no friends. Me and you. I'm at the Chevron on Main Street and 5th. I'm calling your witch butt out." "Which, I'm on my way." The phone clicks. Me? "No fricking way, he's coming!" The guy rounded the corner and pulls into the gas station. We hid our cars behind it and then, when he parked, we boxed him in. He had a Glock too. Fricking idiot. He was on probation and had a loaded piece. Yes, he showed up in the stolen car with a fricking shaved key in the ignition he used to steal it. Because people liked it so much, I talked to the original cop who has the gift of talking crap. He said a few months later at court, the guy claimed the gat was not his. As we found it under the driver's seat, he said it must be hers. So messed up. But the jury didn't buy it. We saw him shoving something from his waist under the seat when he saw us. Also, yeah, the look on his face was classic. It went from, "I'm gonna kill this dude," to the look a prey animal gets when it knows it's done. He was killed a few years later in a chase in another stolen car. He was ejected from that one. Motor vehicle stop. "License and registration, please." Proceeds to lean over the passenger seat, scoops up a handful of lo mein and tries to put it in the officer's hand. He was locked up for DUI, 4th offense. To this day, I still wonder if he thought he was passing his correct paperwork or if the Chinese food was some sort of peace offering. Was witness to a crime and had to give evidence in court. Basically witnessed a girl crashing her car and barrel rolling it into a tree. She was clearly drunk. The fireman arrived after 10 minutes, her car had leaked petrol everywhere, and then her husband shows up on foot and tries to calm her down, followed by her mother in a car and the police. She tried to claim that she wasn't the one driving, even though no one else had been in the car. In court a year later, she said her mother had been driving, the one who showed up in her own car 10 minutes after the crash. She also punched an officer in the face and was pepper sprayed, but that's a whole other story. Needless to say, she was found guilty. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Dispatcher. Had a guy call in and tell us that he's currently violating the protective order by being with his ex who is pregnant by him. Wants us to call the judge and get it dismissed so they can go inside the restaurant and eat. Officer is standing next to my partner who answers the call and asks the guy where he is so he can send the judge to him. The guy hangs up. Responded to an apartment complex for a kid eating a corn dog and was stuck on the roof. The FD arrives and gets the kid off the roof. Asked the kid why he was eating a corn dog on the roof. His answer was, "Because I threw it up there." His look of "duh" left me speechless. DUI trial. Defendant chooses to represent herself. She tries to introduce evidence during the trial, but is quickly blocked by the prosecution. The judge, maybe taking pity on the flaming train wreck that was this woman's defense, asks to see the evidence. It was a receipt from the bar she left before I stopped her that showed she purchased 2 large margaritas. Her whole defense was, "I couldn't have been drunk after only 2 margaritas." She was found guilty. My initial reason for stopping her was that she drove down an embankment on the side of the road to get to a McDonald's drive-thru. My friend is sober driving and there's not enough seats, so 2 people offer to go in the boot. On the way, she gets pulled over and the officer comes up to the window and asks if she knows why he pulled her over. She says, "Because of the 2 people in my boot?" The cop says, "No, because you failed to indicate at the last intersection, but tell me more about the people in your boot." "These are my pants, but those are not my pockets. Can't make this crap up." I maintain that there's a small chance that there was a tiny portal in front of each pocket redirecting to a less innocent man's accoutrements, but nobody listens to me. One of my favorite Cops episodes was a guy they stopped, pulled some substances out of his pants, and his response was, "Those aren't my pants." The cop then said, "Oh, and whose pants are they and why are you wearing them then?" The guy said, "I don't know." My ex said to the cop who pulled him and his friends over, "I'm so frickin' high right now." I had a friend back in the day that earned the name DUI Don because he was driving a girl home after partying one night. She was off her rocker and he was only high. Got pulled over, could easily say that he's sober, was happy to blow into the tube and get out of it. The first thing he says to the cop is, "I'm gonna level with you, I'm really high." He spent that night in jail. And the cherry on this, and the reason I know the full details of it all, is because the girl with him was 17 and bonus, homeless. When she didn't have anywhere else to go, she gave them my address, an 18-year-old living alone, and I got to become her temporary legal guardian. Awesome night. Thanks, DUI Don. "Sir, can I see your driver's license?" "I don't have one." "Then why were you driving?" "I wasn't. I was traveling." I was the victim of burglary, but heard this from the police officer. I saw the guy breaking into my place on security camera and called them. They managed to arrest the guy while he was still inside packing up my stuff. He was pretty cocky to the police, as he thought that as he hadn't actually left with his bag of swag, that he hadn't committed a crime yet. All he did was break a window. My grandpa was a cop. He told me a story about how when he was still in uniform filling up his squad car, someone tried to rob him with a knife. Needless to say, that didn't work out for him. Apparently it went something like this. "Give me your wallet." "What?" "Give me your wallet." "Are you sure you want to do that?" "Yeah, now hand it over." Grandpa pulls out gun. "Okay, you're under arrest." The robber displayed a shocked Pikachu face. My brother is a Detroit cop. Told me this one. They got a call from someone reporting their car was stolen. They show up and it turns out someone had already stolen the tires off the car and then a different group stole the actual car. They pushed it 2 blocks without tires and left perfect grooves in the street all the way to their garage. Their defense was, "But we didn't steal the tires." Detroit. When we rob you, we really rob you. I'm a corrections officer. 2 inmates got into a fight in a hallway. I was the closest to them and only saw the start of the fight out of the corner of my eye. In my report I wrote that, "I saw the 2 inmates fall to the ground with one on top of the other. Later, the hearing sergeant was reading the report to one of the inmates so they could dispute any facts in the report they felt were untrue or biased. He asked the inmate if they wanted to dispute any facts in my report. The inmate said, "Yeah, we didn't fall to the ground. I grabbed the other inmate and slammed his butt on the floor." What would have been a simple fighting charge turned into an assault charge. Woman is waiting for her DUI trial in the courtroom. The lawyers and judge are milling around and getting their paperwork in order. The trial starts in 10 to 15 minutes. The prosecuting attorney asks her if she wants to take the plea deal one last time. She refuses and goes on about how this is unconstitutional and the police and courts are corrupt and how she's going to take her kid to school, blah blah blah. She's starting to cause a bit of a scene, yelling, acting like a child, just being generally annoying. Someone in the room gets a whiff of alcohol. She's out on bond, so she can basically be given a PBT at any time for any reason. The judge orders one on her. She registers a .226 in court. This woman who is on trial for DUI had the audacity to drive to court drunk and then moan and groan about how she isn't being treated fairly and we're all corrupt, and this is unconstitutional. Not only that, but it explicitly states in your bond conditions that you cannot consume alcohol. So, I cut her off and bring her to the jail. She's still running her mouth during the walk over. I had nothing to say. I had absolutely zero sympathy for her. I could barely hold in my laughter on the walk over to the jail. The confession is my own. The cop said, "You're going 95 miles an hour. Do you know what the speed limit is?" "No." "It's 55 miles per hour." "I'm sorry, sir. I thought it was 65. Not a cop, but I used to read a lot of police reports at my old job. My favorite was a woman who refused a breathalyzer by telling the cop, "I won't blow on that, but I'll blow on your eggplant." In a city near to me, a guy murdered a woman, put her body in a large garment bag, and left her in a vacant lot. Unfortunately for him, he forgot to take the tags with his name and address off the bag from a recent flight. A would-be bank robber wrote his hold-up note and put it in his wallet. He got rattled at the bank and accidentally left his driver's license on the counter when he handed the note to a teller. A third crook just took on more than he could handle and apparently didn't watch the time. He had a long history of Grand Theft Auto and was hospitalized after being badly beaten in the parking lot of a sports area after a lacrosse game. The guy swore up and down that he had no idea why anyone would assault him there. Not that I want to be defending any of these people, but I feel like the stress of committing any of these crimes might overcome a lot of common sense. Personally, I rate my chances of getting away with a crime as less than zero, or maybe this is all a cover. In court, defendant called the judge "Your Majesty" instead of "Your Honor." Friend's daughter and daughter's boyfriend got busted with a kilo of green herb. Friend's daughter says, "Oh, we weren't going to smoke it, we were going to sell it." My boyfriend is a police officer. Last week, he pulled over a drunk driver who ended up speeding off. Car chase back to his house and the drunk guy tells him, "I got home, it's okay, you can go now." Drunk guy continues arguing and it's 3 a.m. so his family wakes up and his son steps out the front porch and yells, "Damn it, Dad, you frickin' idiot, we told you to stop doing this." The serial killer BTK. He used to send taunting letters to the media and to the police about his crimes. He seemingly stopped all activity around 10 years ago when he started to communicate again. He asked the police if he could be traced if he sent them a floppy disk, and they told him no. He sent them a floppy disk, and they recovered data that included his name and his church. He was quickly arrested. My brother-in-law is a cop in a small town. Pulled a car over one night and recognized the kid. Smelled green herb inside the car and said, "Give me the green herb and I won't search your car, won't give you a ticket, and you can be on your way." The kid fights him and says he doesn't know what that smell is. There's no green herb, and "How can I trust that you won't take me to the station if I give it to you?" Brother-in-law promises again that if he hands him the green herb, he'll let him go, no questions asked. Kid keeps being a moron. Brother-in-law searches the car and finds many more substances hidden all over, as well as green herb. Brother-in-law says, "All right, let's go to the station." The kid gets upset and says, "You said you weren't going to do this. See, I couldn't trust you." I groan and laugh every time I think of that. What a dummy. My cop brother told me that this one time he took lunch at Popeyes while in uniform, except for the hat. Once inside, the cashier started taking his order but then stopped halfway and turned to a co-worker that just walked up. I don't remember exactly what was said, but basically the guy taking my brother's order asks the other guy if he took his green herb. The other guy says yes, but he didn't smoke at all and proceeds to hand over the green herb. The guy then says, cool, not to worry, he's got another stash in his car for emergencies like this. My brother then said that he just wanted to eat some lunch. The guys then realized he was a cop. One guy said something like, not again. As my brother started arresting the cashier, he said that he thought my brother was the security guard. So my brother, just trying to make a joke out of it, says, oh, you smoke herb with your security guard? To which the guy says, no, just my manager and his buddy. But the real funny part was when he asked another employee if the security guard was around, and the employee said they didn't have one and didn't know what the cashier was talking about. What's the most disturbing history you've learned about a house you found on the market? The lady next door to me died and wasn't found until she was more liquid than solid on her living room carpet. The family couldn't pay something back about back taxes or something, and the house went to HUD to auction. HUD paid for some cleanup, but not to replace the carpet, only steam clean it. So it finally sold and was talking to the guy who was flipping it. Before I could mention the death, he asked if the house had a water leak under the foundation, because they ripped up the carpet and pad to put down the new floor, and it was really dirty and got all over them and their clothes. I told him what happened and how HUD went cheap on what to fix before the auction. He got green as a pea and then started emptying his stomach right there on his side of the fence. My grandma sells and rents houses in the Denver area. A few weeks ago, I had to help her evict a few college bros from one of her properties. This is a cottage-style home, no second floor, no basement. These guys literally dug a hole in the wooden floor and made a basement where they've been throwing trash away for the last year. Like, it's a living room with a TV, a couple of armchairs, and a giant hole in the ground filled with ice cream wrappers, pizza boxes, and cigarette butts. That seems like 1,000 times more effort than just taking the fricking garbage out. You know, taking out the garbage is a real pain in the butt. I'm going to perform backbreaking manual labor inside my house to avoid walking 20 feet to the street with a small bag of trash. My parents were realtors and also flipped houses. When I was growing up, I used to help them a lot, usually by cleaning. When I was 12, I was helping with a house that was infested with roaches. I noticed the closets were smeared with crap and children's handprints. There were fingernail scratches on the insides of the doors as well. I asked my parents why this was the case. They told me the old tenants used to lock up their toddlers in the closets for days. How about the one I bought? A young person had drowned in the pool, and so far every person that I've met asks me, you know what happened there, right? People are nosy. My mother passed away in my childhood home, which my dad eventually sold. Years later, my brother was picking up the youth group kids, and one teen got in and said, our house is haunted. Years ago, a lady died in there. My brother looked her dead in the eye and said, she was my mom, actually. The poor kid burst into tears immediately. My brother has such a horribly dry sense of humor. Huh? Got a good deal on an apartment because a lady was beaten to death next door. It was an old house converted into separate units. The narrator can't be the only one who would buy a house on the cheap because of a horrible crime there. Bring it on, ghosts! When I was looking for my last house, I went with my wife and realtor to look at several houses. We went to look at one house in particular because it didn't seem like the price they were asking could be real. A huge house sitting on tons of land with outbuildings and going for millions under market value. We got there and the realtor said, oh, I should mention, a serial killer lived here, and when he was put away, cops found 11 bodies on the property. I think owning this house would make me perpetually afraid of coming across a 12th body digging a vegetable patch or something. Yeah, but you have the perfect alibi for that dead body buried in the backyard. Yes, Mr. Police Officer, we brought this house from a serial killer. I guess they forgot one body. Whoopsie, don't know how my wife got there at all. The body's still decomposing. Well, that is really weird. Not that I was buying, but one that I was visiting. I went to visit my sister in California, and once I flew in, I wanted to shower. Well, I took a long enough shower that the mirror was all steamy when I got out, except one tiny dot in the middle of the mirror. My immediate thought process was, oh, weird. I guess if you draw on a mirror with Expo, it won't steam around it. So I went to go investigate, and upon looking right up to it, I realized it was a fricking camera lens. Well, I freaked out and ran out of her room and dressed and then went and told her. We went around the back and looked in the utility closet type thing that looked like it was in line with her room. Sure enough, the drywall had been cut away and repatched at some point. We cut it open, and while there was no camera, there was a little lens still stuck to the mirror. It's real freaky to think whoever was getting actually spied on, and if they ever actually knew. Ugh. I used to rent an apartment that was in a converted Victorian asylum. It was rumored to be haunted, but I never heard or saw anything whilst living there. When I met with the letting agent to hand the keys back at the property and for him to run through a final inspection, he asked if we had been happy there. I said something to the effect of, yes, but we were only moving as the landlord had set it up for sale. It became clear he was after some kind of ghost story as he explained that none of his colleagues liked going to any apartments in the building, because when taking photos to market one of them, the red eye detector kept triggering on his phone when no one was in the frame. The poor guy looked nervous as heck the whole time we were there. This is actually a really common glitch when taking photos in old buildings like this. It's caused by the light reflecting off the red eyes of the unquiet dead roaming the space between this world and the next. I photograph homes. It's normal, people die in homes. I photographed a few homes where the reason for sale was a recent self-deletion in the home. I photographed a new home where the builder ended things with himself in the garage just before the project was complete. The weirdest one was very creepy and suspicious. I photographed a billionaire's compound where the guy had an absurd fascination with flesh. There were well over 50 heads mounted on walls from water buffalo to elephant, 5 to 10 large cats, all stuffed. Chandeliers made from the feathers of rare birds, stools made from elephant feet and legs. They were hairy. Ugh. Paintings and abstract photos of oily skin, veiny muscles of humans and animals, among other things. I looked for his kill room, but I never found it. In general, I find billionaires don't behave like normal people, but this one was particularly weird. The flat opposite my house was occupied for a couple of years by a lovely young man. Long hair, gothic clothing. That might not be the right term for it, but frick it, I'm old. Super polite, if a bit reserved. He self-deleted in the flat one day. I only found out afterwards that he had had a liver transplant some years before and was worried his new liver was failing. I wish I could have helped him. I used to see him at my doctor's surgery. I had a new and sickly baby and was there a lot, and so was he. But we just said hi to each other, how are you, etc. I'm really sad for him. The flat has been occupied since by a succession of young couples. I've never said a word in case it troubles them, but I've tried harder since then to let them know I'm there if they ever need a friend. Being young and just starting out can be very lonely. I eventually heard that there was a secret passageway and stairs between bedrooms on the 2nd and 3rd floors that no one could now find, but it was apparently there, well hidden. I've been in a few where the realtor might have had a hard time selling it after it was fixed. One in particular where the entire family was taken off the mortal coil by the mother, who then set herself on fire in the back utility room. My aunt is a realtor and was selling a house that a lady owned, but it was renting out to her college-age son and a few of her friends. When they went to do the first walkthrough so my aunt could take pictures and such, it was apparent that the lady hadn't been in the house in ages. Every single room had a TV, a chair, a box of Kleenex, and a bottle of lotion. They were literally just spanking the mule with each other all over the house all the time. The lady was so embarrassed. When the sold sign went up on our last house, our neighbor came over and said, "Now you're moving out, would you like to know about your house's history?" It turned out the previous owner was a smack dealer who allowed his customers to shoot up in the living room. That explains the brown, dried blood-colored arcs all over the walls when we stripped the wallpaper. He also used to hire out his old lady from an upstairs bedroom. Incidentally, our bedroom. Lovely. An old friend of mine bought a nice house in a quiet neighborhood. The place is beautiful and has a really nice deck out back with a hot tub. About 3 weeks after closing, he was cleaning out some previously owned junk in one of the closets and found an old DVD. It was a Bridget the Midget adult movie with a hot tub scene on the cover. His hot tub. It was epic. That's not so much creepy as it is a fun fact about where you live. I would for sure be showing that to everyone. After they'd used the hot tub, of course. I've been doing this job a while now. The thing that scares me most is how often I find the locks reversed on bedrooms and basement doors. There's a lot of really crappy parents out there. I've actually done this, and it's because the little kids lock themselves in their rooms all the time. I'm big enough and resourceful enough to escape a room like this, but my kids are not. Once you've tried talking a 3-year-old through turning the little knob a few times and they're freaking out, you flip the doorknob around to prevent it from happening in the future. This isn't so much disturbing as moderately amusing. Just days after closing on my house, a friend of mine who was helping me move in told me he had been in my house many times. Turns out his childhood babysitter had lived there. Then he tells me he just wants to show me something in the backyard, and he leads me to the specific fence post on which he had drawn a wang as a child. I do wonder if he'd actually drawn it that day while I wasn't watching. Something similar happened to me. My grandmother lived in Chicago and needed to sell her house. She actually sold it to my husband's father when my husband was about 3. They ended up moving to Hammond around the time he was 15, roughly about the time I met him. My husband and my mother grew up in the same house and didn't find out about it until 4 years ago. Small world. In Seattle, there was a house just up the block from my work. This was probably around 2007 or so. There was a zombie-themed rave, and said house became the after-party. Most of the club kids knew each other, and the ages ranged from 16 to 21. Unfortunately, they invited this loner dude who came over and started unloading a shotgun at around 6:30 to 7 in the morning. Kids dressed like zombies were pouring out of the house, jumping over fences, into the street, into the backyard. Nobody knew who was actually wounded and who wasn't because everyone looked effed up due to their costume. I think like 6 or 7 people died. It's totally effed and has always stuck with me, probably because it was in my neighborhood which I lived and worked. Eventually, the house went up for sale, and I always wondered how much the prospective buyers knew about what happened there. Houses in Seattle don't stay long on the market, so it had a lot of real estate agents and buyers coming and going. I also wondered if there was a little discount considering its history. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I've been in the residential property management industry for 14 years and have managed and leased thousands of apartments and single-family houses. A historic building I used to lease apartments for was formerly an insane asylum, and prior to that was a hospital. The building itself is on the National Historical Registry. Thankfully, I never had a bad experience here except for one unsettling thing in a stairwell, but I did meet people over the years with stories. Anyway, certain things are required for historical landmarks and restoration tax credits in this particular city, so many of the apartments had to maintain certain features of the original design and architecture, like some old tile was still on the walls and floors. The thing that creeped me out was the basement. Even after more than 50 years on most days, you could catch a whiff of formaldehyde. Some days were more pungent and distinct than others. Of course, being the basement, it also had the addition of that musty basement smell. Since this was once a hospital, obviously, it had a morgue. There are a handful of apartments in the basement, and the original tile on the floor marked where the morgue originally started. In one of those apartments, there's a bedroom with incredibly spacious walk-in closets. If you haven't already figured it out, those 2 massive closets are the old body lockers, with the original latches on the walls next to the entrance to the closets. I still for the life of me can't understand how anyone could live in that apartment, because I wouldn't even go into that apartment by myself. These are my 2 most outrageous. I present the tales of the crazy old gynecologist and the adult toy aficionado. The first is short and sweet. A lady wants me to list her house. I go over and do the routine. As I go to the bedroom closet, she yells, "Oh no, don't go in there, it's a horrible mess." "It's a walk-in closet, but please don't go in there, it's such a mess and I'm embarrassed." She went on about it way too long for it to just be a mess. I leave it alone and that's that. House gets listed, and 2 weeks later I offer to do an open house. The lady has started packing already because I already helped her find a new house. She leaves, I get the open house going, and a nice couple comes in. They go to the master bedroom and there's a wall of boxes in front of the closet. I explain that's a walk-in closet, and last time I was there the lady said it was just filled to the brim with stuff. The wife wants to see the closet. The husband starts moving boxes. I ask him not to and he keeps going, "If I'm going to buy a house, I want to see the whole thing." Well, he kind of had me there because I know they loved everything else about the house, and the wife seemed super stoked about the kitchen and the master bath. The last box is moved and the door is opened. Inside is a 10 by 10 foot room, jam-packed with phallic adult toys. They're each standing up on very nice custom shelving units with glass doors on the front. The glass doors also have numbers made from a home label maker unit. On the inside of the door is a large sheet of paper. Each number has a corresponding name of some guy. That's when we noticed 2 large boxes in the corner. Each box contained 36 unopened Clona Johnson adult toy making kits. We stared in amazement for a while, and then the husband just fricking lost it. It took a good 20 minutes for him to stop laughing, or at least randomly bursting out in laughter. We put everything back the way it was, and that was the end of me letting anyone check out the closet for the rest of the open house. That couple actually ended up buying the house, and since I know everyone will ask, there were 183 homemade statues of eggplants in the closet, and a few store-bought ones too. Now, the other story is the crazy old gynecologist. He asked me to come in and give him a price. He didn't want to sell, but wanted an official market analysis to present in court for his divorce. He offered me $500, so I was happy to come out and write it up for him. First off, I didn't know his profession. He never told me much later until he'd asked me to put doctor and his name on the paperwork, and I asked what kind of doctor he was. Anyway, I show up and the outside of the house looks great. It's super clean, very well maintained for a 70-year-old house, and looks pretty as a picture. I walk in and there's nothing but shelving units lining every single wall. Floor-to-ceiling shelving units. They're also in the middle of every room on the first floor. All of them are loaded with plastic storage bins that are labeled. They all seem to have pretty routine stuff. I'm thinking the guy is just a very organized hoarder. One has boxes and boxes of new pens. One is all rolls of tape. One big one is all toilet paper. As I get further into the house, the storage bins go from office supplies and toiletries to spoons. Just a giant clear storage tub full of random spoons. One is used paper clips. Used paper clips? He's differentiating between new and used ones. Alright, whatever. That's when I notice every room has a TV and a surround sound system, and it's all set up on a shelving unit. This was back when flat screens were like $5,000 and every room had one. Every room also had flying saucers on the ceiling, which he said were repeaters so he could change every TV to the same channel at the same time. I must admit, that was pretty cool. In any case, we go upstairs and it's a mess. The shelving units were all along the walls, but not in the middles of the rooms. And he's got a toaster in the middle of the bedroom floor with a bag of butternut bread next to it and a plate with a mushy stick of butter that looked like it was a week old. It had that sick yellow crystallized look to it. There were books all over the floor and it looked like he just sat on the floor reading and eating toast. Everything was sprawled out in a perfect circle around where he'd sit. That's when I noticed the clear storage tubs were much stranger up here. One entire rack was used tissues. Another several boxes were lubricant. A couple were speculums. Then I realized there were a lot of boxes of tissues, new and used, around his little toast and book circle. I took my measurements and couldn't help but look at some of the titles on his bookshelf. The two that stand out the most were Doing the Deed by Yourself and Show Me. I mostly remember Show Me because it was a very controversial book when I was a kid. It's basically a published book of borderline illegal material disguised as a life skills book. Everything else on the wall of books was also related to this kind of material, and we're not even close to done. I walked into this other bedroom and realized how dark it was. He had tinfoil taped in the windows to black out the room. It was filled with computers on a giant custom-built horseshoe desk. If I recall, there were 8 or 9 screens wrapping around the room, in addition to 2 big flat-screen TVs. As I measured the room, I noticed more tissues and several boxes of new tissues. The screensavers were all showing slideshows of either undressed women or women in bathing suits. I say nothing and we move on. And here's where it gets weird. Oh, you thought we were past the weird stuff? Hold on to your hat. He takes me to the basement. It's a dungeon. Not some flashy, sanitized adult dungeon either. This was dark, dank, and musty. 2 cages in 2 corners. Some kind of crucifixion cross with restraints, some weird table with restraints, a full wall of whips and chains and needles. One featured a paddle that had tacks sticking out of it. Swings for doing the deed of varying sorts hanging on the rafters. A wooden trough filled with what I hope was water. There was also a coffin, a rack, an Iron Maiden, and stocks. You know, like the medieval head and hands town square punishment device. Every wall, support, and piece of furniture had some kind of restraints on it, and he walked me through as if nothing was strange about this. And the coup de grace, he shows me the utility room and then shows me his secret room, where the door was disguised as paneling on the back wall of the laundry room. Inside looked like a dungeon out of a freaking horror movie. A giant shelving unit filled with VHS tapes was along one wall. A computer desk with a computer and old-school video editing machines, I assume, boxes of his favorite tissues all over the editing station. Then there was a brass bed with restraints. There were no sheets on the bed and it was horribly stained with God only knows what. Not blood though, I probably would have called the cops if I saw blood on it. There was a mirror above the bed with a microphone dangling and 2 VHS cameras on tripods trained right on the bed. This guy acted like all of this was totally normal. He was like, "Oh, and here's the secret room. I like to come down here to relax. It's just so quiet down here and it feels so safe because it's just hidden away from the rest of the house. If someone ever breaks in, I'd come down here and they'd never even know to look here." No mention whatsoever of the obvious use of this room. Screwing? Tickling the pickle? Murder? The unspeakable act? I have no fricking clue. I collected my $500 and got the F out of there as fast as I could. No one believed me back at the office, and you know what? I don't believe them either. I wouldn't have believed myself if I'd heard it from someone else. I'm guessing he's dead now since he was, here's the kicker, probably about 75 to 80 years old, and this was about 15 years ago. His age and frailty, in addition to my morbid curiosity, was probably the only reason I didn't take off immediately. I remember thinking in my head, keep your guard up, you're going to F this old dude up if you have to. That was one terrifying visit I'll never forget. It's also the only time I didn't shake a customer's hand as I was leaving. My hand still tingles when I think about the introductory handshake and all those clear tubs filled with used tissues. Well, words are failing the narrator. My God. What do you even say or do in that sort of situation? I only wonder what the inheritor or buyer of that house had to do with the thousands of dollars worth of equipment. Anyway, on to our last few stories. Not a realtor, happened to some friends who brought a property. Very old site, about 300 years old, which had been part of a convent, the living area of the nuns specifically. The aforementioned place had been refurbished as small apartments and houses about 50 years ago. They went to live there and there was some maintenance given to certain places of the property, the common areas. There was a wall which was slightly wider than the others. They began to give maintenance to that wall, but the outer layer fell apart due to the rain and old age. While trying to fix that, they found dozens of skeletons of babies, very little babies, and very old little skeletons. Well, authorities and historians came and went by, and they came to the conclusion that the nuns tossed their babies there right after giving birth to them. God knows if they were alive or dead by then. Not unheard of, old religious orders were very strict about that, and then there were even more gruesome policies regarding nuns' pregnancies. My uncle bought a caravan down the coast on a well-known beach. Just prior to selling it, police detectives turned up and turned the place upside down and inside out, looking for some sort of information. Turns out the family of one of Australia's most notorious serial killers used to own the caravan many years ago. What ways have you seen someone hilariously fail using an everyday item? My 90-year-old grandmother was teed off at some other 70-year-olds cooking for a church because they were trying to peel eggs with a vegetable peeler. Witnessed multiple people ask why north just moved on a compass after they'd rotated 90 degrees. I really suck at land navigation and compasses and azimuths and all that stuff, but reading this made me feel like a land nav genius. When a friend and I were in Rome, we were in a restroom and we couldn't figure out how to turn on the sink. We looked for handles, we checked if it had a motion sensor, nothing. Just when we were about to give up hope, I saw a small rubber dome under each sink. I decided to step on it and voila, water. The best part was that there was a man waiting to wash his hands who probably thought that we were the two biggest idiots in the world. We went to the UK this summer and met our first electric shower. Could not figure out how to turn it on until we accidentally flipped the switch in the hallway, and voila. Feels dumb in retrospect, but it was completely foreign to us, literally and figuratively. I worked with someone who genuinely did not know how to use paper clips. He was really embarrassed when someone called him out on not knowing and showed him how. I worked with someone that would hole punch the top left corner, then put the paperclip in like a keychain. After years of using family's Windows 98, I upgraded the family with an old but gold computer. My mother rang me 3 times in the next 2 weeks because she couldn't find the power button. Why? Because the old computer had a big red power button, and the new computer was broken because it had a big blue power button in the exact same spot. I don't even work in IT, and I've considered using the Internet Explorer icon for a Chrome or Firefox browser just to get some older people I know to stop using Internet Explorer. For my dad, I just renamed Chrome to Internet. It's pretty effective so far. I did this with my 72-year-old uncle. I removed Internet Explorer from the desktop and set the Firefox icon to that of the IE one, and named it Internet Explorer. I set up some great add-ins and bookmarks, and then only gave him a user account and set up Chrome Remote Desktop. I went from fixing it almost weekly to maybe twice a year. 5 out of 7 would recommend. My father is fast approaching his pension and is far more computer savvy than I am, hanging my head in shame. I watched someone try to light the base of a firecracker, as in the end without the fuse. To be honest, it is a bit of a miracle that the guy that did that is still in one piece. I saw someone park his bike on the sidewalk and then painstakingly hang his bike lock on one of the handlebars. Then he just walked away. When I was in college, whenever I couldn't find a bike rack, I would just park it and lock the front wheel to the frame, then sit somewhere inside where I could see it. In the cafeteria one time, someone tried to steal it by riding away and tossed themselves over the handlebars. Pretty entertaining. I once, as a child, thought that one of those long lighters for candles was a curling iron, proceeded to burn the crap out of my ear and hair. I saw someone open a milk carton by cutting the top off with a knife. First time this kid stayed away from home without parents, he thought an iron worked just by being a heavy metal thing to flatten the clothes into submission. Didn't realize you could turn it on to heat it up or anything like that. I remember sitting at a bus stop opposite a pair of escalators that were the wrong way to standard traffic. Every third person went up the down escalator. I go up about 4 escalators every day. Sometimes they change the direction so the right escalator comes down and the left goes up for no apparent reason other than to mess with the people. And mess with the people they do. Everyone, like me, who's stuck in their routine in the morning, will try to go up the usual escalator only to have people come their way and almost bump into them. Can opener. Twisted so hard they fell sideways off their chair. A time or dozen back in my days of working on a forklift, after a long night when I'd get into my car, I'd start it and promptly put on the left blinker and rev the engine trying to back it up. One day was particularly bad and it took me a few moments to put it all together. I've seen someone so incompetent with a can opener that every can they opened looked like a Pillsbury biscuit canister. I've got one of those can openers that you can just lay on top and cleanly opens the can with no sharp edges. I've never had it not work. You can literally just lay it on there and turn the crank really easily. It's so easy and requires less effort than a normal can opener. My wife cannot operate it. I've explained it multiple times. She brought a crappy old style one that creates throwing stars every time you use it. I thought those types of can openers were foolproof until I got one that refused to grip the edge. I had to try so hard to convince my significant other that they were the superior can openers, only to have to later agree to getting a sideways one after an unfortunate incident with a can of lima beans. I felt so betrayed, and now he doesn't trust my opinion on any kitchenware. A shovel. I saw someone put their foot up on it, ready to push down, and then just topple sideways. Holy moly! Actually, no holy moly. Back in the 90s, when I tried to show my mother how to use my home PC, she picked up the mouse and pointed it at the screen like a remote control. A lady of a certain age had her first computer and tried to operate the mouse on the floor with her foot. Her only frame of reference was a sewing machine, which was operated with a foot pedal. You know, she had a reference and she tried for it. I can be happy when old people do that rather than just blame me for breaking it. I know someone who was running late to work and his polyester polo shirt was still wet from the washer. What did he do? Put it in the dryer for 5 minutes? Use a hairdryer? No. He whacked it into the microwave and put it on for a couple of minutes. Nice and warm when he got it out. A trip to the emergency department and second-degree burns later, and he was a changed man. I had a college student who once set his apartment on fire because he put his wet clothes in the oven to dry and then immediately left to go to Six Flags. One of his roommates fortunately came home before the fire got out of hand. A family member in the early days of polyester got a stain on her skirt at work. She took off her skirt, cleaned it, and dried it, but the whole thing melted in the dryer. She laughed and made a skirt out of a magazine and wore that home. One guy at a breakfast buffet got to the bacon tray. He took a pair of tongs and held them backwards, as in the part which you're supposed to grab bacon with, in his hand, and pinched it closed so only a slit was left between the two rods, trying to slide the bacon in between the prongs. I had to help him after watching this for 2 minutes. This was a grown man, by the way. I went to a Chinese restaurant once and had a good giggle at the 2 women at the next table, expressing how great the learner chopsticks were, despite clearly struggling with them. It was cheap wooden chopsticks and they hadn't even snapped them apart. Saw someone trying to staple some pages together without a stapler, just going at it with a single staple in hand. Did they manage it though? After about 20 minutes of struggle, they had something that vaguely resembled a stapled document. So, yeah, I guess so. I'm going to assume that by vaguely resembled, they mean was a gross parody of. There was no way that was a tidy or satisfactory document, or stable. I wouldn't necessarily call this a fail, but more of a success. Went to the beach with family and my cousin was on watermelon duty. She starts cutting the watermelons and says, "Man, it's so hard to cut this." I turn around and she's using the wrong side of the knife, but she had already cut the watermelon into like 4 pieces. She's known as not being the brightest person out there, but I was still surprised at her superhuman strength. I went to the library high on green herb and I swiped my student ID through the automatic stapler. Now, every time I go to the library, I have to explain why I can't swipe my card through the card reader. An egg. I took a cake decorating class. In 12 weeks, this woman never figured out how to crack a raw egg. Every single time, she crushed it, no matter what advice she got or how many times she was shown. In high school, we had to do a cooking class. A guy in my group tried to peel a boiled egg and ended up with the shell and all of the white part of the egg in the trash, and presented the spherical hard-boiled yolk on the plate as the finished product. When I was a kid, we would laugh when my mum would try to play Mario Bros. On Nintendo and she would try to jump lifting up the controller. Now, I try to play Nintendo Wii with my son and he laughs at me because I forget to jump by raising up the controller. She truly was ahead of her time. One of my roommates once failed to make the Kraft instant mac and cheese bowls twice. The first time he didn't take the lid off and just YOLO'd the whole thing into the microwave. On the second attempt, he put in nowhere near enough water, there's a line on the inside showing you where to fill it up to, and he got a second helping of burnt pasta. And I got a microwave that smelled like burnt pasta for a week. He had a bachelor's in engineering, a bachelor's in applied mathematics, and a master's in applied mathematics, and he couldn't make Easy Mac designed for 12-year-olds. Not someone else, but myself. I constantly fail at ripping cling film or tinfoil correctly. In the case of tinfoil, I always struggle to rip it in the first place, and then when I do, I leave a weird tail on the end of the roll instead of a clean line. Same thing with cling wrap, but then it proceeds to cling to itself and nothing else, so I wind up with a bunch of awkward balls of it. I'm just trying to cover my soup, guys. My fiancé can't use a toaster. It's either lightly toasted or Satan. There's no in-between. I've shown her numerous times. Same result. Would sir like his toast raw or carbonized? Raw toast? Do you mean bread, my dude? Maybe she's so bad at the toaster it comes out as dough? Sometimes when I'm in a hurry, I'll start pulling my car door before I reach the handle and it sends me into a backward stumble. Gotta look around and see if anyone was watching at those moments. Occasionally, I'll get too close and pull the door open straight into my own face because my mornings are difficult for me. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Not so much hilarious, but a great example of humans using logic without understanding the true meaning. I was in Portugal, in Lisbon, at a better-than-decent hotel. There was a couple in front of the elevator looking up at the floor indicator in a way that we presumed this was a new thing for them. We were on the ground floor. The male of the other party saw the elevator was above us and pushed the down button to bring it to him. The elevator came, they got on, but we didn't. As the elevator left for the parking garage, I pushed the up button. I still remember the look of mild confusion on their faces when we met again. It was flawless logic, that's just not how elevators work. Pushing the directional button in the direction you want to travel instead of the direction the elevator has to travel to reach you is not necessarily obvious. Much like the people who drive grey cars in light fog, they often don't realize that turning on your lights isn't so that they can see the road, it's so that other people can see their car. Sometimes I'll start reaching for the button on my keys to unlock my front door. I once called my cousin to bring my extra set of car keys to me because the remote button stopped working. She suggested using the actual key to unlock the actual handle. I've never felt stupider. Back in primary school, while waiting at something akin to reception, I don't remember exactly where this happened, I saw a kid about 7 or 8 years old accompanied by a teacher taking nibbles from an unpeeled banana. He was trying to play it off like he enjoyed the taste, going, and trying not to cringe. I think the teacher had to point it out to him that it's meant to be peeled. He was the kind of chavvy kid that got in trouble a lot, and the teacher was with him for some kind of supervisory help. I don't remember much about him other than whenever I saw him about school, I'd think of him as that moron who pretends to like eating banana peels. A soda machine, the kind where you press your cup against the lever to make the soda come out. I was at my local burger joint waiting for my order when I saw a middle-aged gentleman walk up to the soda machine with a cup in hand. He placed his cup under the spout and pressed the logo part on top. Nothing came out. He pressed harder. No soda. Undeterred, he changed spouts to try a different soda. Maybe this one was out. Nope. He comes back to the original spout and pressed the top portion so hard with his entire hand that somehow his cup and machine got tilted for long enough for a few drops of soda to come out. He takes his cup with a few drops of soda and leaves. Many moons ago, while working at an electronics store, a woman came in furious because we sold her a useless phone. After talking her down to where she would explain the issue, we found out that she didn't want a cell service plan, so she bought a cordless phone, never connected the base to the phone line, and thought she could just use the cordless receiver as a cell phone. Then there was the guy that returned a microphone, saying he was getting shocks from holding it. I opened the box to find out that he'd cut off the plug that goes into the amplifier and put on a regular wall power plug. It turned out that he didn't know that you need an amplifier and speakers. He thought that you just plug a microphone into any old outlet anywhere and suddenly you have a loud booming voice. As a working voiceover, I'm looking at my Rode NT1 and imagining myself just severing the mic cable in the same way that this gentleman did, and it's hurting both my wallet and my brain. Working in IT. Please reboot your computer. What does that mean? Just turn the computer off and turn it back on again. 5 seconds later, okay, done. Wait, that was quick. I pressed the power button, it turned off, and it came back on. Are you pressing the power button on the monitor? You didn't say monitor. What's a monitor? You see the screen? Not that button. Press the power button on the box that the screen connects to. On the modem? Yeah, sure. Okay, Windows has that startup screen. Fantastic, that's what we need. Idiot! Why have you wasted my time? You should have used the right words. It's working now. I thought you were IT. This happens more than you would think. Nah, it's fine. Computers have only been around in more or less their current form and UI for around 20 years. You expect people to familiarize themselves with the basics of ubiquitous technologies in only 2 decades? Sheesh. Saw someone slide a cheese grater to grate the cheese instead of just sliding the cheese. This was a big grater, so it wasn't really practical to move the grater. I'd have to say cinnamon. One fall day, I decided to make myself some hot cocoa. My husband at the time, now ex, saw me making some and decided he wanted to make some too. I decided I wanted to go all out. I added whipped cream, then sprinkled some sugar and cinnamon on top. It looked so good. I even put a cinnamon stick in it to make it look extra gourmet. All my husband saw was that I had cinnamon sprinkled on top, and there were cinnamon sticks out on the counter. So I sat on the couch to enjoy my cocoa and I heard, how do you do it? And I turned around to see him holding a cinnamon stick and gently shaking it over the top of the whipped cream. I couldn't stop laughing. I once had a roommate who offered to help me make a fridge pie. We had both just moved in and didn't have everything we needed yet, so I asked her to whip cream with a large fork and even showed her how to do it. I go to do something else for a few minutes, then turn to see if she's done whipping the cream yet. She was just moving the fork slowly back and forth an inch or so in each direction, in a straight line. When I turned to her, she complained that it's not working, and that we really need an electric beater to whip cream. I giggled and said she has to do it really fast and in larger strokes to incorporate the air, and demonstrated again. She then threw the bowl and fork down in a huff and said, "Oh, I give up," and stormed out of the kitchen. It was the first warning sign, really. My mother-in-law has struggled with the tea kettle as well as a pram. The kettle has a button to open the spout. Hold down the button, spout lid pops up, and you can pour the boiling water into your cup. Somehow, she was trying to push the button from the side and then turning the kettle over until nearly upside down to get it to pour, because the lid was not in fact opening using this method, causing very hot water to spit out all around but not actually into the cup. She did this several times, all while making frustrated noises and burning herself with the wayward tea water. I finally managed to get her to put the kettle down and showed her how to press the button on the top instead of on the side. I know they also make kettles with sliding buttons that you push from side to side, but this is usually evident right away, or at least after the first failed attempt. Not for mother-in-law, who upends a full, very hot kettle anyway. And then there was the case of the pram versus the tree. Walking along pushing an empty pram, because no one in their right mind would let her push a pram with a baby in it, she was confronted by a tree and its rather large roots. She proceeds to back up a step and then charge forward at speed, but still the roots resist her efforts. Cue to the mad woman pulling the pram back and slamming it into the roots several times while bystanders look on in horror. Assuming there's a child within, one woman shouts and starts to run over to rescue the child who's not actually there, which gives mother-in-law the added adrenaline needed for one final grand slam, sending the pram flying over the roots and straight into the trunk of the tree. And that's why grandma isn't allowed near small children. My husband has cooked exactly 3 times in the decade of our marriage. Each was a disaster, but the final straw was when he tried to make ramen. We were at an Airbnb that didn't have a kettle, so I told him he'd have to boil the water in a pot. I noticed that the water is boiling, but he's just standing there. I asked what he was doing, the water was ready, and he says, "Isn't it supposed to whistle?" The man was used to hearing a stovetop kettle whistling when the water boiled and thought the water itself, by some mysterious mechanism, whistled when boiled. I have a friend who is literally a genius. This guy finished standard university-level math by his early teens and is now into the stuff you need an advanced degree just to work with. Brain the size of a planet. And there was the time he called me in a panic because he'd locked himself inside a house. He couldn't find the key, you see? It was so funny I was tempted to leave him there. The fact of the matter is that this house didn't even have a locking deadbolt, which is why it's a funny story. It wouldn't be interesting at all if he was actually locked inside. Give me some credit here. My father has a PhD, countless professional publications, teaches at a prestigious graduate-level program, and is generally a super smart guy. He cannot drive in reverse or use basic hand tools to save his life. Push and pull doors. Every time anyone was affronted with one ever. I work in a restaurant and I remember dropping a plate of food to my table as well as leaving them a peppermill per their request. As I'm standing at the bar casually surveying the dining room, I see the guy at my table attempt to navigate grinding pepper onto his plate. Unsuccessfully. He's turned it upside down and is shaking it vigorously all while inspecting his progress. Eventually, he sets it down, seemingly satisfied with his results, I suppose. Then his tablemate picks it up and simply grinds some pepper onto her food. My cat tried to jump onto a kitchen stool. He didn't see that there was a tray placed on top, and for a brief moment, he and it flew, magic carpet style. I saw a woman trying to use a kitchen broom to sweep 3 feet of snow from her car. She was sweeping it right in front of her car. Best part was her dumb boyfriend using the broom tray to remove the snow from the top of the car and tossing it right where she was sweeping from. This went on for about 30 minutes, and then they went back inside. In the late 90s, I showed my dad how to use a search engine. I left the room for no more than 5 minutes before he started cursing wildly. My dad, being in construction, searched stud finders for his first search. Embarrassingly, there have been multiple times where I've tried to apply the 2-finger zoom functionality to a paper map. It's become such a second nature with electronic devices that sometimes it just happens reflexively. Me. I thought French presses were fancy and connoisseurs used them, so they must be some tricky, nuanced way to make coffee. I had to use one once and I realized it was actually very simple. You just separate the grounds by lifting them out of the coffee. So I poured water in, pushed down the filter, then spread the grinds on top. My sister came in and face-palmed. What's the most entitled behavior you've seen from a passenger on an airline? Every so often we get the odd straggler who boards last, who finds a vacant seat in first or business, thinking that we won't know that they're from coach. "Excuse me, sir, I might need to see your boarding pass. Sorry, your seat is 58A, not 1A. But I'm so tall, I need the legroom." Awkward silence. I saw this being given as advice on Twitter recently. This freelance guy who travels a lot decided to share his pro tips for long flights. A lot of it was just about seat posture and stretching and such, but then one tip was to always be the last person on the plane so you have your choice of open seat. Yeah, no, that's a great way to have nowhere for your bags and still get the same seat you were assigned. My girlfriend's mum is a flight attendant. One time, a woman got quite angry because her daughter spilled apple juice all over and there was not a clothes dryer on the plane for her daughter's sweater. Not an attendant, but was on a flight with really bad turbulence. It went on for about 10 minutes, then the old lady next to me reaches up and presses her button. The attendant walked over to see if the woman was okay, and the woman began to yell at the attendant for the rough flight and that she'd been flying her whole life and clearly the pilot has no idea what he's doing. The stewardess just walked away. Once got stranded at Newark for 22 hours after our flight had an unfixable fault and was cancelled late at night. We got put up in a hotel, but understandably by the time the new flight rolled around, earliest they could fit in a new flight, everyone was quite tired and agitated. As we were waiting to board the new flight, the flight attendant announces they would be boarding people with additional needs and families with young children first, followed by first class, then premium economy, etc. All the pretty standard stuff. Obviously, it can take a bit longer for people in wheelchairs to board, so it makes sense for them to go first. It's common on most airlines, I believe. Anyway, this business dude races to the front of the crowd and starts yelling at an attendant, saying it was already disgusting that he had lost a day due to their incompetence, and now he had to wait even longer despite being a first-class passenger and paying big bucks every year to fly with them. The worst part was he was looking at the others in the crowd to back him up. Like it was perfectly reasonable to scream at this woman who, like us, had also been stranded and most likely had had very little sleep and was doing her best to do her job in this difficult situation. But she was awesome. Without missing a beat, she smiled and nodded and said, "Okay, sir," then made a big point of leaning into her mic and telling the waiting line of people in wheelchairs and mothers with babies that this gentleman needed to board before them and could they please wait. Literally every single person at the gate is looking at this guy with disgust on his face as he tries to backtrack and says he doesn't mind waiting for the first group, but the attendant says, No, you've made yourself quite clear, let's get you boarded and the others will have to wait. He's humiliated as he sheepishly walks by. She handled it perfectly. Frick yes, stewardess, frick yes. In what universe do you think I'm the good guy for saying this kind of thing? Also, this is not going to get him into the destination any quicker. The only thing he's speeding up is the transition between his airport chair and the chair on the plane. Not one specific passenger, but a type of behavior I've unfortunately seen too much of. A couple will book separate seats, the man in premium economy seat with extra legroom, and the woman in a normal economy seat. The woman will then play the sad sack and ask another passenger to give up their comfy seat so they can sit together. If the other passenger refuses, usually because they paid extra and don't fit a regular seat, some will even complain to the crew to make them move the other passenger. All of this to save a few bucks on the second premium seat. Seeing as a lot of people asked, no, crew don't move passengers because they're sitting next to someone else's spouse, and certainly not from a premium economy seat. This drives me insane. I once had a man get very heated because he was on the plane with his wife and 4 children and did not pre-select seats. And he wanted me to switch my window seat for a middle seat in a different row so his family could all be together. But I paid extra to pre-select my window seat. It was only like $15, but why should I have to give up what I paid for just because you wanted to save money and assumed others would rearrange themselves for you and your family? The flight attendant sided with me and the 6'4" guy who was in the aisle seat of my row, who also didn't want to move and was much more assertive than me, and the family was spread throughout the cabin. Mid-90s, there was this kid in customs, Toronto to Houston flight, who was going nuts. He was driving people crazy in the departure area. On the flight, he had a full-sized metal Tonka truck that he was running up and down the aisle with. He smacked me on the head and nearly hit my mum in front of me. I grabbed it before he could hit my very frail and on blood thinners mum and gave it to a crew member who refused to give it back to the family. The family refused to seat him until it was announced that there would be no food or beverage service until the aisle was cleared. Another woman grabbed the kid and returned him to his family. They let him run loose again as soon as the service was over. Finally, someone from the cockpit had to come back and tell the family we couldn't start the landing approach until the brat was in his seat. They put him in his seat, screaming bloody murder the whole time. As soon as descent started, they let him up and he was running up and down the aisle as we landed. The family was so dense that when the captain ordered everyone to stay in their damn seats and that only families with small children would be allowed to deplane first, they smirked their way down the aisle. My mum walked with a cane and the crush getting off was hard for her. Since we were home, we just waited till the aisles were clear. When we got off, you could hear the kids screaming halfway down the jetway. A police officer was holding him and the rest of the family, I'm guessing mum, dad, and 2 grandparents, were all in handcuffs. I once watched a very well-dressed businessman have an epic toddler-level tantrum at a check-in counter when he was advised that his flight was delayed due to fog. He literally screamed and jumped up and down and demanded that the airline better do something about it or else. The guy working behind the counter just smirked and suggested that the business guy was welcome to go outside and try to flap the fog away with his arms. The entire queue burst out laughing. I was on a plane at the Burbank airport and a family that was on standby boarded the plane without being told that they'd be on the flight. They proceeded to go passenger to passenger trying to get people to deboard the plane so they can use their standby tickets. They argued with the flight attendants. It was at least 45 minutes of us sitting on a plane on a runway, listening to this family of buttholes argue about how they need to be on this flight because they have somewhere to go. I was on my way home from Vegas and was hungover, and I don't think I've ever wanted to punch someone more than I did in that moment. A few years back, I had a 7-hour flight and a kid was sitting behind me who kept kicking the seat. I decided to just wait, maybe he'll eventually stop. Nope. It went on for about an hour until I couldn't take it anymore. 10 years of my regular flying, and this was the first time I called and complained to an air hostess. She apologized to me and asked the family behind me to keep it down. They just stared at her and did nothing. The moment she turned away, the little craphead started kicking against me again, and I couldn't take it anymore and turned back and said loudly to the family, "Could you please make him stop doing that?" The father, I presume, said sorry and still did nothing. The kid kept on, so finally I called the flight attendant and asked her if there was any other seat available because they're not listening or have no common decency, pointing to the family behind me. She came back after a few minutes and proceeded to take me to the first class. My first experience in the luxury section. The worst thing was she kept apologizing to me and I kept asking her to stop and that it wasn't her fault. It was just weird. Also, F those butthole families. I'm not sure this would happen these days. I feel like airlines have got tighter about letting people just move into the champagne and caviar zone. Please, if you have any modern-day accounts of this happening, share them in the comments below. I was a kid flying out to Utah to start my teen tour. About halfway through the flight, departing out of New York, the captain got on the speaker to announce an engine had failed and we needed to make an emergency landing in Chicago. Needless to say, we got a little concerned. Except for one passenger who stormed up to the flight attendant and explained she was a nanny and needed to get to Utah to attend to the children she took care of. I'm not exactly sure what she was hoping for, that the pilot, upon hearing a babysitter was on board, would risk the lives of everyone else to fly us all through, or that the flight attendant would be so moved by this story that she would climb out on the wing and repair the engine mid-flight. Alas, there was no emergency jetpack to give this passenger to blast away from the plane to get to Utah on time, and she was told to sit down. Was on a Vegas to Boston flight when a passenger passed away in his sleep. The whole situation was heartbreaking and the flight attendants were clearly shaken. We stopped in New York for emergency personnel to attend to him. The whole process was very quick and the pilot and staff handled it like champs. Just as we were about to take off, the guy in the front row asks the attendant if we'd all get free drinks due to the inconvenience. I've never wanted to yell at a stranger so much in my life. The next day I got an email from the airline with a $50 voucher to apologize. I didn't want it nor expect it and wondered if it happened because some idiot complained about the diversion. I did tweet the airline to compliment the staff on their handling of the situation. They deserved it. I didn't say what the situation was, just the flight number. I figured they'd figure it out. Flight attendant: "Can you please open your blind all the way? It's regulation for landing." Passenger: "No, I want it closed." This goes on for a minute. Passenger is using his tone to assert that he refuses to open it. Flight attendant speedwalks to the handset and her voice comes on over the PA. "Hello, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to play some trivia today. The question is, why do we keep the blinds open during takeoff and landing?" And without letting anyone answer, she jumps right into, "It's so that we can all keep an eye on the outside of the plane for safety." You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I fly a lot and I was on one of those planes where half the plane were ignoring the rules and stuff. When we touched down, these people immediately got up, walking around and taking their bags out of the overheads. Mind you, the plane hasn't parked. It's literally just touched the ground on the landing strip, so it's still moving, and it's dangerous for half the people on the plane to be messing around, and even worse, taking all their heavy bags down around everyone else's heads. The flight attendants are now desperately trying to get these people to sit down until the plane stops moving, and some people were waving their hands at them dismissively. I think the captain heard the commotion and the flight attendant half yelling, because all of a sudden the plane did a very abrupt stop, which knocked over all the people standing up and then continued on its way to park. The flight attendant then said, "This is exactly why we have rules." Yeah, all those people stood up and looked real sheepish. I remember being an unruly little kid who wouldn't put my seatbelt on in the car, so my mother would just slam on the brakes, making my face hit the seat, and this is exactly how I imagine the situation you just described. I had someone have a meltdown because I had to have them properly stow their wedding dress. The thing was massive and spilling into the aisle, blocking seats of the entire row. They may have had to pay the hotel to get the wrinkles out, but I likely saved them from shoe prints and beverage cart rollers going back and forth over it. Still, she was in tears and I was not going to risk others' safety, including my own. My future sister-in-law brought a ticket for her dress to fly in a seat for her wedding. She of course went through the correct steps to do this, called the airline to see if she could even do that, got a gate pass for it, had to go through the metal and body line for TSA and it counted as her carry-on, had to pick up a special boarding pass, early boarding, and it got the window seat so no one could trip over it in an emergency. If Southwest had said no, she couldn't do it, then she would have just driven her dress, but everyone was super accommodating and even gave all of us a bottle of champagne to celebrate. We did share the bottles with another wedding party that was flying out who didn't get the special treatment. My mum was a flight attendant in her 20s. I asked her for a story. Her first week flying, there was a group of drunk men on the flight. At one point, when returning to quiet them down again, one of the fellows had his Johnson out on full display for all, in its flaccid glory. She says to him very politely and a bit taken aback, "Why don't you put that away now?" And this drunken man flat out says to her, "Why don't you put it away for me?" with the most revolting smug smile on his face. My mum says, in her exact words, "I'd be happy to do that for you, but you'd never be able to use it again." My mum has always had the most ridiculous stories that always turn out to be true, and I'll take her word for this one. Threatening castration on a paying customer is in this case completely justified. If they're exposing themselves on a plane, I feel, let's get that written up in all the airplane's handbooks. I was on a flight from New York City to Portland International Airport. Only empty seat was next to me, a middle seat. Bulkhead, but the kind where there isn't a wall, just the first-class seats in front of us. Door is about to close when a large, sweaty man comes running into the plane to claim the empty seat. He was carrying a full-size pizza box. All the overhead bins were already closed and full, but that didn't stop him proceeding to open them to find a place to stash his pizza. The stewardess kindly informed him that he couldn't put his pizza in an overhead bin. "But it'll get stepped on," he gruffly informs her. She proceeded to tell him to take his seat and put the pizza in front of him. He told her that he flies with pizza all the time and has never been treated this way. He persisted, but as their argument was getting pretty heated, he finally succumbed and put the pizza under the seat in front of him and sat down. The stewardesses have now started the safety, video, and demonstration, and he pulls out a flip phone and proceeds to make a call. I can tell he's going through menus, so I'm thinking he's calling Delta to complain. Nope, turns out to be his landline phone company. He had been late paying his bill and was trying to get them to waive the late fee. They wouldn't. He's arguing with them. Plane has pushed back from the gate and is headed toward the runway at this point. Stewardess comes over and tells him he needs to put his phone away now. He motions with his hand to say 1 minute. "No sir, it needs to be put away now." He flips it shut dramatically mid-sentence and puts it in his pocket. Stewardess is back at the front of the plane. He then decides to stretch. I'm pretty much plastered to the wall as he tries to stay out of his way as he extends his arms up and then to the side, etc., and then twists in his seat back and forth, clearly agitated. He then extends his arms up, stretches out his fingers, and proceeds to crack his knuckles very expressively, one at a time. Sort of like a primary school bully would do on the playground before they were going to kick your butt. In that whole knuckle-cracking process, he flips a middle finger toward the flight attendant. I didn't notice her reaction as I was just waiting to get the 6-hour flight underway and over with. Next thing I know, I can tell we're pulling back to the gate. Flight attendants prepare for arrival and cross-check. Message. Door opens, cockpit door opens, captain comes to our row. "Sir, I understand you are harassing my flight attendant. I need you to leave the plane now." The pizza man attempted to argue and even ask me and other neighboring passengers if we had witnessed anything. Clearly the pilot wasn't budging on his decision, so the guy got his pizza off the floor and left the plane. Door closed and we departed. Empty seat next to me. A dozen years ago, I flew from Chicago to Israel. Very long flight with a stop in the middle, with a woman who didn't seem to understand that everyone around her was in the same situation she was in. She dropped a number of passive-aggressive gems over the course of our day together, but the worst one was right when we were being seated for the first leg. The plane was one of those 3-seat, 5-seat, 3-seat setups with aisles on each side of the 5-seat section, and this woman was seated in the middle of the 5-seat section. But you can't seat me in the middle. What if I need to get up and walk around and the people next to me are asleep? I'll be very uncomfortable for this the whole flight. Wow, lady, you figured out why flying kind of sucks all by yourself. Now sit down and start pretending you're not here like the rest of us. Currently a flight attendant flying 5 years for a legacy carrier. I have a few that pop into my head. One was that I was working a quick turn at the end of a 3-dayer, and we had a medical emergency in first class where a passenger passed out. We had to give him CPR and hook him up on an AED. So 2 of us were with the man and the other flight attendant was paging a doctor and communicating with the captain. While this was going on, a passenger in the first row of the main cabin, who can clearly see everything going on, kept paging for a Coke and getting very upset that we wouldn't serve him. Finally, a commuting flight attendant stepped in for us and had a word with him. Another one was actually my last trip, when a woman who boarded towards the end, sitting in row 10A, who left her bag in the aisle blocking everyone else trying to get on, because she was looking for a place for her bag. She found a spot towards the back, and put her hand in the air and started snapping and hollering at me to get her bag for her. I went up to her and told her to get her bag out of the aisle. She got in my face and demanded that I needed to put it up, to which I answered that I couldn't lift her bag for her and she threw a fit. Finally, a nice gentleman helped her. Anyway, after boarding, she accused me of stealing her first scarf. I didn't. Then she called me a blonde B-word. She was removed. I had a lady another time get mad at me because I wouldn't give her my personal food I brought from home and paid for with my own money. She said she was hungry and she needed it. Nope. Another flight, I had a man and his small kid on a flight, and he, during boarding, asked me for one of the first-class meals I was preparing, and I asked him where he was sitting. Once he said a row in main cabin, I told him, I'm sorry, these are for first class, but we have food for purchase in main cabin. He then told me his kid was hungry and demanded we give him free food. I kept saying, I'm sorry, but the food is for purchase. He didn't think it was fair that he had to pay for food because he had a hungry kid. The seat switch scam has happened to me more times than it should have. I'm a college student and thus naturally people, especially couples with babies, think it would be much easier to force me into switching. There was this one time I was on a really long flight from Chicago to India. I usually never haggle much about a seat and I'm pretty cool about switching if people ask me for it. I have this crappy quality of trying to avoid conflict in any way possible. This time I was fortunate enough to get one of those front seats with a lot of legroom. I knew this seemed too good to be true, and at any moment a couple with a baby would request for the seat, to which I will cave. Needless to say, minutes later, this couple came up to me, with the flight attendant, asking me to switch because they had a baby, and the father was sitting next to me. The mother had a middle seat way back in the plane for a very long flight. Although I was hesitant, but with 3 people awkwardly waiting on me to say yes, I eventually caved. As I was moving my stuff, one of my small, empty plastic bottles fell from my bag and nearly hit the father. Now, you have to understand that this was one of those light plastic water bottles that could barely hurt if you tried to hit someone with it, let alone when it falls from the bag. But for some reason, that angered the father into believing that it could have somehow seriously injured their baby. Even after apologizing to him for a solid minute, he kept shouting at me about how careless I was and that I needed to learn plane etiquette. That just did it for me. I told him that I was no longer comfortable with the switch and just went back to my seat and pretended super hard to fall asleep. The entire flight, he did his best to try to annoy me, fighting me on the handrest, making it hard for me to move around, etc., but I never felt so good about my plane etiquette. Currently on an airplane and saw a man berate the flight attendant because they let employees of the airline board before the customers. He was so angry because he paid for business select. They didn't pay for crap, so why are they boarding before me? The flight attendant responded with its company policy, many are actually working and just need to get to the airport they'll be leaving from. And there's also only 3 on the flight, so what's the big deal anyway? He continued to whine and complain to her for another 10 minutes or so. All because now there were only 140 seats to choose from instead of 143. Boo-hoo. Have you ever come across an online post by someone else that was about you? What was it? My cousin posted about how his family makes fun of him for playing video games and collecting Lego since he's in his mid-20s. He has a job and buys his own stuff. He went on to say that 2 family members, without fail, poorly sneak through his room every Thanksgiving so they can buy him a Lego set he doesn't already have for Christmas. Apparently, my husband and I are not as smooth as we thought. I read a post on Reddit Relationships where this person had gone on a first date with a guy and she thought he was a very nice and pleasant guy, but was boring and there was no chemistry, and she wanted advice on how to reject him for the second date. The details she described about the first date were exactly similar to a first date I'd had a week before the post. 2 days after the post went up and people responded with advice, I got a text from the girl I went on a date with saying she thought I was a nice person and she had a good time, but she doesn't think we'll be a good match and wished me all the best. So yeah, I came to know about my rejection before she could actually reject me. In all fairness, this was my first date ever and I probably was extremely boring and nervous, and I don't blame her at all for rejecting me. Someone made up a story about me stealing their husband and posted it on this kind of site. They stole a picture from my Facebook profile and posted it. To this day, I have no idea who did that. That person must have known me but didn't actually know where I live since it was posted with a town that is 6 hours away from where I actually live. I immediately told my husband about it and thankfully he didn't believe it, but somehow someone found it at work and everyone was talking about it. Even the VP called me to ask me about it. It was embarrassing. The post still lives and there's nothing I can do for them to take it down, but at least I got one to remove my picture. This gif of a kid playing soccer who takes 2 goal shots to the face, back to back. That's me. I have no idea who filmed it or posted it to the internet. I made a post asking for advice about one of our roommates not having a job and worried about how to pay for rent. We ended up talking to him and he got a job. Everything was cool. At the end of the conversation, he says, "And stop posting about me on Reddit," in a playful way. I found a post about my friend's band, and then I wondered who posted it. And I found very quickly it was my ex-girlfriend who was now dating the guitar player of said band. And so I had to click through her history and found a post about how I'd accidentally kneed her in her privates while we were doing the deed, and it made a funny noise. It felt pretty weird reading that. If you'll excuse the narrator, he has to go and check the entire internet to see if any of his many romantic fumbles have been aired for all to see. Divorced my ex because of addiction and mistreatment, culminating in a serious felony attack. A few years later, he started dating. I checked her out online and stumbled into a post she made on legal advice websites asking questions about my will. She was asking about the custody arrangements I've made for my kids in the event that their father isn't sober or healthy at the time of my death. I lost my mind when I read that. I'll admit that my phone call with my ex about this did not reflect me at my best. I once met a guy at a bar. We exchanged numbers and were going on a date before I googled him and found out that he and his mum were being charged with attacking a woman who was feeding stray cats. I told my coworker the story and showed her the insane surveillance video. She shared the story on a thread where Aziz Ansari was asking if people ever do research before their dates, and he included my story in his book Modern Romance. So that was pretty cool. In case you're wondering, no, I didn't go on the date. Also, this guy and his mum tried to convince the woman that they beat unconscious that she fell. She didn't even know that she was beaten until she saw the surveillance video. Oh man, I would have just gone on the date and wait until he asked, "What hobbies do you have?" to say, "I like feeding stray cats," just to see his reaction. Seems like his reaction might be violent if you did this. Yeah, that seems like a great way to get beaten up by a guy and his mom if you ask me. Yep, my old roommate posted that I was stealing money from her and not paying my bills. Everyone on the thread was calling me a piece of crap and everything. What she forgot to put in the post was that she was a raging alcoholic. She never had money for the bills because she'd spend it on booze. Everything was in my name because she still owed money on everything and they wouldn't turn things on in her name, even after she cleared her debt. She didn't talk about how she would be late for rent every month, but I was always on time. It got so bad that the landlord would call me to collect the rent. She is now in rehab and still trying to reconnect with me. I don't know if I can ever be her friend again after that. There's always more to the story, and I'm glad that I don't live with her anymore. When I was a freshman in university and Yik Yak was big. Classic. I had a knee brace on an injury that I wore every day. I'm also 5 foot tall and generally petite. Once I went to pick up a big package from the mail center and bring it back to my dorm. 1 block, so I knew I could do it and didn't ask for help. Someone wrote a yik-yak to the tiny girl with a knee brace and a giant box, "Hang in there." It kinda made my day. My mum even has a screenshot of it saved. I'm pretty sure about this. There was a story I read about a girl walking home late on a foggy night, seeing someone she thought was pretty odd walking towards her. As I remember, described angrily, and she explained debating crossing the street but continued forward. When they crossed paths, she said hello, and after a significant pause when they were already a few steps apart and she heard a faint little hey, which she also found odd. That guy was me. I was actually just very drunk, a little high and cold, walking briskly towards my house, which was a few miles away from the party I was at that evening. I remember seeing a silhouette of someone coming through the fog and getting a little scared myself, followed by relief that it was a woman, then instantly filled with the realization that my drunk butt is probably frightening the crap out of her, which led to panic to get the situation over with as quickly as possible. I even remember thinking at the time of responding to the story, but somehow the concept of, "Hey, I think I'm the guy that weirded you out. How neat is that?" didn't seem worth the neat to even weirder ratio. I've been in that situation so often. I'm a tall and wide-shouldered guy, and you can't see my baby face in the dark. Yes, someone posted one of my prom pictures pretending to be me. I saw it on the front page, as did my ex-boyfriend who featured in it, and was teed off that I'd posted it. To be fair, the pic is hilarious and totally front-page worthy. They must have been someone who he knew in real life because they linked to my ex's music site, mentioned what I'm doing now, detailed our relationship, among a few other things. They ended up deleting their account once it got big enough that people posted it on my Facebook wall and stuff. There can be only one. I was dating an alcoholic, and when he fell off the wagon, I spent a lot of time reading alcoholic subs to try and better understand how to help him. I found some posts he made talking about me and how to explain his disease to me, since I grew up with alcoholics and it deeply affected me. People kept telling him we wouldn't make it or that I must have really low self-esteem, but he said I was smart and cute and had a once-in-a-lifetime soul and wasn't the kind of person you gave up. I found it well after the fact, but my heart basically exploded. Felt like dressing up one day for school, red lipstick and all. I checked Yik Yak later, and someone had called out my exact outfit down to the shoes and said, "Why?" That's 2 posts about Yik Yak, and the narrator has no idea what the heck it is. Let me check Google real quick, and it's local Reddit? Huh, I thought the global reach for advice and commentary was kind of the point with Reddit. Feels like you'd be far more likely to get caught out on Yik Yak. I was judging for a writing competition and gave a poor score to one of the writers due to copious typos, grammar problems all over the place, and jarring narrative that seemed not to serve any purpose. She started stalking me and leaving nasty messages all over the forums, and then went over to Tumblr and here talking crap about how horrible I am. I basically blocked her and reported her behavior to the mods, but they didn't do much, so I just ignored her, and she eventually disappeared. A few months later, she left a comment on one of my stories telling me that she'd gone off her bipolar meds and apologized for her behavior. I didn't reply, but it looks like she's in a better place and getting help now. I think it's brave of her to apologize for that. It's not easy to revisit things you wish you hadn't done if you don't have to. Good on her for recognizing her situation and apologizing. And good on you for keeping your distance and wishing her well. A few years ago, before I met my wife, I answered a Craigslist ad from someone who needed a friend. I'm being very vague on purpose because I know she's online a lot. The day we met, I knew I wanted to date her. We spent a lot of time together for a few weeks, and then she was suddenly busy most of the time. A few days later, she called me to apologize, saying she kinda freaked out because I was getting too close and she wasn't ready for a relationship right now. I was devastated but backed away to respect her request. A few months go by and I met my wife. Fast forward 2 years and my very pregnant wife and I are shopping and we see the girl. She's very uncomfortable seeing us and my wife gave her a big hug, saying that I've only said the best things about her. My wife was actually a little jealous of the one that got away, but I'm proud that she was so gracious about it. We only spent a few minutes chatting, then she said she had to go, and that was the last time I ever saw her. But a few weeks after that, I saw a Reddit post from a woman who claimed to have learned too late that she was in love. She mentioned a few specific things that made it super obvious it was her, and that it was about me. That day was really rough, and I was super teed off at her for a long time. I felt like she was acting out an Adele song by posting such specific information online, hoping I'd see it and go back to her, despite being married and about to have a child. Not totally rational, I know, but it was just frustrating to me. The silver lining is that I have a son I would never trade anything for and a wife that loves me most of the time, which is normal, I think. Today, I hope she's happy, but I would never go back to her, and I have zero regrets. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. An unknown poster posted a picture of me from a concert tailgate. Apparently, I have the highest belly button ever. It was posited that I was raised by bats. I thought the whole thread was hilarious but never figured out who posted the picture. It was grabbed from a buddy's Facebook. A couple of months ago, I got a screenshot from a friend saying someone was posting awful things about me on their blog. I was never mentioned by name, but it referenced a lot of identifiers that made it plain to see it was me. Went to the blog and there were several entries that were just about why and how much she hates me, can't figure out why anyone would want to be around me, and a recurring theme that I'm copying her. What makes it a bit weird is that we've only met her once at a party, but there was such vitriol in the posts. I have to admit it does bug me. I'd love to say it rolls off my back, but the part of me that struggled in making friends and trusting people just feels so insecure when I'm reminded of it like that. I ran across an ex posting about how we met, and when someone commented, "You should marry him," she responded, "I plan to." It sent my heart exploding to think someone could even jokingly say something like that about me. Well, it was a joke because she dumped me for her ex a week later. I made it to the cringeworthy Reddit once. It was a picture of me being stupid in a mall for the sake of a joke that was posted on social media and eventually found its way to Reddit. Me and my friends had a good laugh many years later when we found out. Back when Yik Yak was popular and I was in college, there was a post stating, 123 Fake Street, apartment 23, needs to take care of their dog. I hear it crying every night. We had no dog, never quite figured that one out. I always thought it was my roommate who made weird noises while playing video games. My freshman year of college, I saw a yak that was like, "The girl in philosophy class wearing the specific article of clothing is gorgeous," or something like that, clearly talking about me. I didn't tell anyone because I'm pretty average looking, and I didn't know if people would believe me, but it made my entire week. Not on Reddit, but I matched with a girl on Bumble and I was in the background of her first picture. I was wearing a Gary Payton jersey and still had a man bun. Rest in peace to the hair. Aha! So you were able to whimsically say that you had already had a long and storied history together on your first date. Magnificent. I found myself in a picture once. I came across a post that showed a bunch of people on a plane returned from Afghanistan, and he was giving the finger or something and sent it to his mum. His mum replied with her doing the same thing with a bunch of co-workers. I was in the first picture. It was kind of crazy seeing myself on the front page and was fun guessing who posted the picture. It wasn't the actual person who sent it to his mum, but a different co-worker. An ex of mine has made a Reddit account for the sole purpose of crapping on me and my posts on Reddit. Honestly, I'm just flabbergasted a person I loved, was intimate with, and dated on and off for almost 7 years is nothing more than a Reddit troll now. It would be really funny if it weren't so sad. It was a photograph on Icon Has Cheeseburger of a cat next to a piece of string in the shape of a heart with the caption, "Now will you feed me?" Not only was it quite certainly my parents' very distinctive cat, it was the flooring and the skirting board of my parents' living room. Quite frankly, it creeped the F out of all of us as we hadn't taken the photo, none of our friends had taken the photo, and we owned no pink string. We ended up deciding for our peace of mind that the painters who did my parents' house last year must have taken it and posted it on the internet. After my loser ex and I broke up, I saw him post to Reddit saying that their roommate had moved out and changed the Netflix password on them, asking for advice on getting it back. It was my Netflix account, paid for exclusively by me, and I cancelled it within 20 minutes after leaving because they couldn't be bothered to tear their eyes from the TV as I packed up my things in tears. I was in the very worst days of my anorexia and depression and had dropped below 75 pounds. I'm a 5'8" male, by the way, and was going to the gym to ride on a stationary bicycle every day for about 40 miles. I was often either very high or on several 5-hour energy shots every morning I was there. I came across a post on this sub from someone who worked at the gym asking for advice about whether she should do something about the skeletal guy that comes in every day because he looks like he's dying. Some comments were really quite disgusting. People saying that I was probably just image-obsessed and insisting that anorexics are narcissistic and vain. Truth be told, I was just kind of waiting to pass away at that point and completely checked out of life, living on 100 to 500 calories a day. And when I found the post, I got in the car and impulsively drove down I-5 on a full tank of gas with no destination, just bawling. Then ran out of gas and slept in my car at a truck stop. Alright, I'm going to keep it vague, but I found a post on Reddit relationships by my ex when we were dating. I found the post about 4 months after he wrote it, and I was moving away at the time of the post, and we did eventually end up breaking it off. And the post was basically him saying he didn't want to lose me, but he felt like it was happening. Felt pretty crappy after finding it, lots of regret. Do people even talk to each other anymore? Half this post is people telling internet strangers things they'd be far better off saying to the other person. I was once alerted by a friend that a picture of me was posted on the old facial book rather than Reddit. It was on some lame page of D-bag gearheads and a picture of me filling my tires up at a gas station immediately after I picked my car up from a body shop unrepaired after a recent accident. Random guy who snapped the pic was making fun of me for totaling my car, when in all reality I avoided what could have been a far worse situation as an SUV T-boned my Miata. Luckily, I swerved in time to avoid a direct hit to my door with the SUV hitting my tire instead. Overall, I called the D-bag out on his ignorance and told him to stop creeping on chicks at gas stations and stick to tickling his pickle to cars instead. Overall, I felt weird as crap and creeped out that some guy was taking pictures of me unknowingly at a gas station, then posting them to the interwebs. Can't imagine the lives of celebrities stalked by paparazzi. Gross. A co-worker of mine must have forgotten that I was on her Facebook and went on a rant about me. We were goofing off at work and I made a comment that if I moved away and somehow ended up at that job again, that something had gone terribly wrong in my life. Little did I know that that's pretty much what happened to her. I was incredibly embarrassed and apologized profusely, but that still didn't stop her from slamming me on Facebook while all of her friends joined in. At least I got to defend myself. This was also the same person that dragged me for being unable to breastfeed my kids. If you really loved them, you'd blah blah blah. What a C-word. Sort of. I saw a post asking for ideas on a fairly narrow research paper assignment, because she needed to turn her term paper topic to her professor the next day. My husband was teaching a class on that exact topic, with that assignment due the next day, so I suggested something I knew he'd be really interested in. He came home the next day all excited that one of his students had picked that topic. Holy crap, you are the patron saint of undergrads. I need to start contacting my professors' wives. Let it be known that people should not start contacting their educators' families at home, just in case anyone was already searching the web for their details. A few years ago, I was browsing Reddit Forever Alone, and there was a post that said something like, "I have a date on Monday, so I guess I'll be seeing you guys on Tuesday," along with a bunch of crass jokes about his date and how he was planning on knocking her up. Didn't take me long to realize that this was the same guy I had a date with on Monday, so I commented about how I'd see him in a few days, at which point he texted my number to verify it was actually me. We laughed it off and I still went on a date with him. He was pretty fun and it went fairly well, other than his constant awkward jokes about how I was so perfect for him and how badly he wanted to get me pregnant. We hadn't even kissed and I was maybe 18 and he was in his mid to late 20s, so it was extra uncomfortable and I didn't know how to respond. We talked a little a while after and never actually ended up making plans for another date, partially because logistics and partially because his endless comments about impregnating me were really starting to weird me out. A few months later, I ran into him commenting about our date and how it didn't go anywhere, but I was too young and immature for him anyways. I had this terrible roommate. He made me so uncomfortable that I mostly hid in my room. He crossed my boundaries, invaded my privacy, and was passive-aggressive. I finally gave my notice and started packing. He posted a cheesy questionnaire on Facebook, and one of the questions was, "What are you most looking forward to?" He put, "My horrible roommate moving out." A bunch of people I don't know, who must have assumed his roommate couldn't see, started offering vague supportive comments like, "Oh yeah, bad roommates are the worst," or "Hope they leave soon." It bothered me most because first of all, the only thing I ever did to him was not want to date him and put in my notice, but also the fact that our mutual friends could see it and so could I, which is just rude. I decided to comment and said, "I'm sure your supportive friends who don't know the situation at all are unaware that you're being this rude where I and our mutual friends can see it. You aren't a perfect roommate either, but at least I treat you with enough respect to not badmouth you so openly. If you're going to be purposefully cruel and try to humiliate me, I'll have to unfriend you so I don't have to see it." Shortly after posting, he deleted the whole thread. I used to be really active in the Reddit for indie makeup and more, and there were brand owners and some rabid fans there. Makeup reviews end up getting taken very personally. I get so many people trying to spread crazy rumors about me. Or maybe it was just the same crazy brand owner with 20 alts. People were saying I gave negative reviews for attention and would message new members negative reviews unsolicited just to destroy businesses. Who the heck has time for that? Your handmade lipstick grew mold. There's no grand conspiracy behind why your sales are failing. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out easymode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.